All right, everyone, welcome back. We're going to get started here. Welcome to the MackPack. Our first agenda item today is an overview of the Northeast Fisheries Science Center Atlantic Mackerel Cooperative Research Initiative. I believe we have Dr. Anna Mercer online, and Anna, if you're there, when you are ready, we are.
Thank you very much. Can you verify that you can hear me okay?
You sound good.
Excellent. All right. Well, thank you so much for the opportunity to present about this new research initiative to the Council. And also thank you to the Mid-Atlantic Fishery Management Council for all their contributions in developing this initiative over the last couple of years, which I'll speak to in this presentation. Next slide, please. Okay, so this research initiative, the Atlantic Mackerel Cooperative Research Initiative, has been years in the making. Back in 2023, I received a variety of text messages and phone calls of the sort that you can see an example of there on the bottom saying, there are mackerel everywhere. What the heck? Maybe in more colorful terms. And when I received those, I had to do some digging. All right, what's going on with mackerel? So I reached out to Kirsten Curdy, our lead stock assessment scientist, and Jason Didden at the council to say, guys, what do you think's going on here? And so in 2023 into 2024, we formed a small group of industry members who had these observations of large swaths of mackerel, as well as scientists from the Northeast Fisheries Science Center and our partners in the Mid-Atlantic Fishery Management Council to put our heads together about what do we know about Atlantic mackerel? What do we not know, which is a lot? And how do we advance our understanding so that our science and management is reflecting what folks are seeing in the water? So at that point, the MackPack was formed. I don't recall who actually coined that term, the MackPack, but kudos to them. And we started to meet regularly to discuss what the fleet was seeing on the water and how we could develop some scientific tools to really quantify those observations. So we developed a variety of research proposals to try to get funding to be able to do some research on Atlantic mackerel, because money does not grow on trees. And one of those proposals was funded for May Sato at the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution, who did some pilot work on using the echosounder data from a couple of mackerel vessels to really understand how and whether we can use that information to quantify mackerel biomass. During that same time, there was interest within the agency in supporting this initiative, but no funding immediately available. And so over those next couple of years, about that year or so, 2024 into 2025, we were asked to develop a variety of different research proposals that really address the major uncertainties surrounding Atlantic mackerel, as well as the concerns that we were hearing from the fishing fleet. And so just about 4 months ago, we received notification that one of our proposals for the Atlantic Mackerel Cooperative Research Initiative, which has 5 elements, was funded. And we've been working very hard over these last few months to get that ramped up. And I will talk more about those components in just a minute. Before I move on, I want to note that this initiative is a 2-year initiative. And throughout that, we'll be prioritizing, as we have from the start, collaboration with our partners at the Mid-Atlantic Fishery Management Council, as well as our partners in the fishing industry, who really raised alarm bells in terms of what's going on and really helped us develop and scope this initiative for maximum impact. So we'll be holding in-person meetings for the folks who are participating in this initiative every year, so we can all be on the same page about what's going on with the research, what are we learning, and what might that mean for assessment and for management. So that will be a priority, both from inception all the way through, is really focusing on this, this collaboration. Next slide, please. Okay, so what is the Atlantic Mackerel Cooperative Research Initiative? The focus of this initiative is to advance our understanding of Atlantic mackerel population dynamics, specifically through collaborative research partnerships between the science and fishing communities. So every element that I'll speak to has deep involvement and envisioning, including visioning from our partners in the mackerel fishing community. And each of these elements is really targeted to answer questions and address uncertainties that exist in the stock assessment to support management. If you can go back one slide, please. Thank you. The last time that mackerel really received this level of attention at this scale was in the 1950s, a lot of the kind of seminal work on Atlantic mackerel. And so we're really excited to have this opportunity to advance our understanding of this species at this point in time now, 70 years later from a lot of that work where a lot of things have changed. Next slide, please. Okay, so what are we going to be doing in the mackerel initiative? There are 5 elements. 1 is focused on acoustic detection. Don't worry, I'm going to spend more time on these. 2 is on an egg survey. 3 is on spawning seasonality. 4 is understanding movement and mixing. And 5 is ecosystem drivers. This is a large initiative. This is all I want you to take away from this slide. There are many elements of this research. And again, to highlight each of these elements was developed in response, 1, to concerns from the fleet and getting our heads together on what are the uncertainties and how can we address these uncertainties using cooperative research. And they're all designed in different ways to also tie in to assessment and management. Next slide, please. All right, so element number 1 is focused on acoustic detection. So developing new tools, namely active acoustics, to quantify mackerel biomass using advanced technologies and analytical methods. Mike Jeck, who's a world-renowned acoustician at the Northeast Fisheries Science Center, is the lead of this research element. It will be supported by folks within our advanced technology, cooperative research, and population dynamics groups at the Northeast Fisheries Science Center. In order to develop these acoustic tools, we'll be using 2 different approaches. First, we'll be calibrating the echo sounders on 5 fishing vessels that they currently have installed and setting up mechanisms to collect acoustic data while they are fishing for mackerel. And then we will also be chartering a mackerel fishing vessel this upcoming winter, and then also the next winter in 2028. We'll be conducting paired acoustic and biological sampling. So we'll be sonifying schools of Atlantic mackerel and then doing tows to dip that net into those schools to classify what the density of those schools are and what size those fish are and how much they weigh and everything in between. We'll then be using advanced analytical approaches, including machine learning, that will allow us to develop echo classification for Atlantic mackerel, estimates of local mackerel biomass, and how those compare to other biomass estimates that we have for mackerel. So this makes it sound quite simple. It is not, and I'm happy to dive into this more at some point with the council, but that kind of summarizes the intent of element 1, which is acoustic detection. Next slide, please. All right, element 2 is focused on an egg survey. So the primary index of abundance for the mackerel stock assessment is not a trawl survey. It is an egg survey that is conducted through our ecosystem monitoring survey, which is supported by our oceanography branch here at the Northeast Fisheries Science Center. They conduct that survey every early June or so. But there's a lot we don't know in terms of how that survey aligns with the spawning seasonality of Atlantic mackerel. And of course, you need to know when they're spawning if you're planning on collecting their eggs and enumerating them. And so the intent of this research element is really to get at that uncertainty. And Dave Richardson from our oceanography group at the Northeast Fisheries Science Center will be supported by folks in our population dynamics and cooperative research teams to lead this initiative. The focus of this particular element is conducting an industry-based egg survey using bongo nets that you can see a picture of there on the bottom right to collect mackerel eggs. And you can see a picture of what mackerel eggs look like there on the bottom. Thank you to Katie Morancic for that photo. In the middle there on the map, you can see our proposed cruise track that will be chartering an industry vessel to conduct bongo tows across that whole red line that you see there, extending from the western Gulf of Maine all the way down to the mid-Atlantic. All those bongo samples will be brought back and processed. All those mackerel eggs will be counted, and we'll calculate in early May egg index to compare to the standard Ecomon egg index that occurs usually in early June. If we see that those indices are diverging, that may indicate that we need to revise the spawning seasonality function in our egg index. And that's something we've not been able to do because we don't have any other information about when and where mackerel are spawning and particularly where those eggs are. And so this would be a big step forward for the mackerel egg index. Next slide, please. All right, element 3 is focused on spawning seasonality, specifically when and where are mackerel spawning on the U.S. continental shelf. This element is being led by Sarah Soloy in the Cooperative Research Branch, and she's being supported by folks in our population biology, population dynamics, and others within our Cooperative Research Branch here at the Science Center. This is the one element that we have already ramped up for this research initiative, and we've been collecting Atlantic mackerel for about the last 2 months, maybe more than that, almost 3 months. We launched this almost as soon as we got, we're told that we were awarded resources for this research initiative. This element really focuses on looking at mackerel throughout the year, every week, and understanding if they are preparing to spawn, if they are currently spawning, if they just spawned, so that we can develop what's called a gonadosomatic index throughout the year. And you can see an example on the top there of a plot that our partners in Canada use to assess GSI. It's called GSI, the gonadosomatic index, which is simply an indicator of spawning. The higher the GSI, which is just the ratio of the weight of the gonad to the whole weight of the fish, indicates that those fish are spawning. So the intent of this work is to collect mackerel throughout the year, so we know precisely to the week when they are spawning in all these different areas, so that we again are able to improve that egg index and understand whether that egg survey that we're conducting, how that is overlapping with or not with the spawning of Atlantic mackerel. So for this, we're working with many different, both commercial and recreational fishing vessels, asking them to collect 50 fish from one location every week. And we're bringing those back into the lab. You can see some photos of it there. We're working them up for weight, length, sex, maturity stage, gonad weight, and age. And ultimately, we will again be assessing that temporal alignment with spawning activity, with the long-term egg survey, as well as just really improving our understanding of mackerel reproductive dynamics, which is something we really have not done for the species, particularly in U.S. waters in the Northwest Atlantic. So it's a really exciting opportunity to advance some basic research on this species, in addition to supporting really critical inputs for the stock assessment. Next slide, please. Okay, element number 4 is focused on how mackerel are moving, specifically how mackerel move between U.S. and Canadian waters. There are separate U.S. and Canadian stock assessments for Atlantic mackerel, and each of those considers movement in a different way, but it's really hard to account for movement because we just don't have good data on whether, for example, mackerel exhibit natal homing, whether they are going back to the same place that they were spawned, or whether they're, even after they're spawning, if they're moving into Canadian or U.S. waters. And so that's what this element really focuses on, and that's a critical piece of the mackerel stock assessment. Next slide, please. We are addressing this question about mackerel movement in 2 different ways. First, we'll be using tags, specifically acoustic tags, to tag mackerel and track them as they move after spawning throughout this region. Jason Morrison in the Cooperative Research Branch is leading this initiative with support from folks in our advanced technology, oceanography, and population dynamics groups, with support from Robert Lennox up at Dalhousie University, who has a lot of expertise, having tagged many thousands of mackerel up in Canada. Jason's actually in Canada right now, being trained how to tag mackerel. So for this, next spring, we'll be chartering fishing vessels to tag mackerel. We'll be sailing on those vessels to tag mackerel up in the Gulf of Maine and in southern New England, and tracking where they move after that spawning. You can see some photos of what mackerel tagging looks like there on the bottom. Next slide, please. And then finally, the second component of this element 4 is using a different technique to understand movement and mixing, and that is otolith microchemistry. Lisa Kerr from the University of Maine is leading this initiative with support from our population dynamics, oceanography, population biology, and cooperative research groups at the Northeast Fisheries Science Center. Dave Secor and colleagues developed kind of piloted otolith microchemistry as a tool to understand how mackerel are moving based upon the stable isotope microchemistry of their otoliths, 5 or 10 years ago. Dave did this work. And so we're leveraging this and applying this kind of advanced technology tool to understand how mackerel are moving. Again, whether they are returning to the same location that they were spawned and whether they're moving into Canadian waters after they spawn in US waters and vice versa. Without getting into the nitty-gritty of otolith microchemistry, in practice, what will happen is Lisa and her team will use the otoliths that are collected through our spawning seasonality element. They will take a tiny little core of the age 0 component of the mackerel otolith. You can see an image of that there. They will run a stable isotope analysis, and that will tell us where that mackerel, hopefully where that mackerel at least was spawned. And of course, we know where we caught it. So we'll be able to tell whether that's a US fish that was spawned in US waters or one that was spawned in the Gulf of St. Lawrence in Canadian waters. Next slide, please. Okay, bringing us home here on Research Element 5, and this was a really exciting element that we just added in the last couple of months. And Cam Braun and his team from the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution are leading this initiative with support from our ecosystem dynamics, population dynamics, and cooperative research groups. And this element is focused on advancing our understanding of the ecosystem drivers of Atlantic mackerel. We know the species is sensitive to the environment, but we don't know enough about that to really be able to quantify that in a way that's meaningful for assessment or for management. And so for this work, Cam and his team and the larger team will be working to co-develop hypotheses about the ecosystem drivers of Atlantic mackerel, distribution and abundance with industry partners, and then quantifying how those oceanographic dynamics really influence mackerel. Cam Braun has an enormous amount of expertise in developing species distribution models for a lot of highly migratory species, an example of you can see there on the bottom. And he'll be applying that expertise specifically to Atlantic mackerel. So we're really excited at the opportunity to partner with Cam and leverage that expertise to really better understand and quantify how the ecosystem is really driving this species. Kim Hyde, also at the Science Center, will be leading what we are calling Squack Chats, not Squid Squad, not MackPack, but Squack Chats, which will simply be informal conversations between the science and fishing community, again, for hypothesis development and understanding of how ecosystem drivers are impacting, in this case, mackerel. Next slide, please. With that, I just wanted to remind you of all these 5 elements that are included within the initiative. I want to thank everyone who's been instrumental, again, in either visioning this research initiative and helping to ramp it up, our partners at the Mid-Atlantic Fishery Management Council across the fishing industry, as well as in the science community. It's really been a team effort here, and it will continue to be as we ramp the rest of these components or elements up over the coming months. And with that, next slide, I would be happy to take questions.
Great, thank you, Anna. And Chris and I will try and figure out how much quicker our agenda would be if we all spoke as quickly as you. I very much appreciate that. Exciting work. So any questions for Anna? Looking around the table. Go ahead, Anna.
Yeah, I'm just curious, are you guys pairing with particular universities to help do some of the analysis of the egg counts and such, grad students getting involved, or is the service actually going to be processing the data?
Good question. Thank you for that question. For the egg survey component, we're leveraging the kind of capacity that we have internally and expertise in processing those mackerel eggs. So we will be doing that in-house. We have partnerships in terms of actually sorting out those bongo net samples, and then we have in-house expertise on classifying those mackerel eggs and counting those. So we are doing the mackerel egg survey in-house.
Thank you. Michelle, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks so much, Anna, for the presentation. Not a question, really just more a comment, I think, on element 5. And I think this is exactly the type of thing that I was referring to after we had our State of the Ecosystem presentation yesterday. This is exactly, this effort, I hope, provides the kinds of connections that I was talking about with regard to, optimal what's the word I'm looking for the positive outlook in terms of recruitment indices, I think especially for mackerel. So really excited to see this moving forward. Thanks, Anna.
Awesome. Thank you. As are we. We're really excited for the opportunity.
Chris Moore.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Thanks, Anna, for the presentation. A lot of stuff there. So one of the things that I think about one of the things that I thought about as you were presenting all that material is basically the question around integration. So when we talk about each one of those sort of modules, each one of those topics, I'm curious, when does that stuff come online? I mean, when do we have results from those projects, and what's the anticipation in terms of integration of those results into, stock assessments and management decisions and all that? Thanks.
Thank you, Chris. That's a really, really good question. I didn't speak to that in the presentation, so thank you for flagging that. The next mackerel assessment is scheduled for next year in 2027, and since we're less than a year out from there, the work that we're ramping up now will not be ready, for prime time for next year's mackerel stock assessment. So we're really looking at the assessment after that. There is a possibility, particularly, that some of the spawning seasonality work could be informative for the upcoming assessment, but that's a bridge we'll have to cross as we kind of ramp up that work and analyze those results over the coming months. So again, we're looking a little bit longer term just because this is a multi-year initiative. We want to make sure that the research we're producing is of the certainty that we need to really be informing both the assessment and as well as for management there. And so we're happy to work with the council as well, thinking about timelines, both for reporting information back, not just through the assessment, but also, for example, Michelle was speaking to these ecosystem drivers work, bringing that back to the council in a meaningful way once we have a really solid product, which I would estimate about a year and a half or so for that. Again, we want to make sure that research is of the quality that we all want and need for informing management. So that's the timeline we're looking at. And again, happy to work with you and others at the council to think through the steps there.
Great, thanks.
Any other questions or comments on the presentation around the table? Not seeing any, and if you don't mind, I'll just open it up to the public. Questions or comments? Okay, not seeing any hands. So thank you again, Anna. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thanks so much for the invitation. Take care.
Okay, we'll move on to the next agenda item. And that is the overview of the Northeast Fisheries Science Center Fisheries Monitoring and Research Division programs. So Catherine Mackerel, oh, sorry, Jason, go ahead. I apologize.
Quick question. We had talked to the Cornell about a brief presentation on the mackerel mesh thing. And if we have time, I think they have a very brief little presentation to do now.
Yeah, Jason, I apologize. I didn't see Emerson's name and I didn't see any hands, but if Cornell is on, happy to and apologize to everyone there for moving on if someone is available to speak to that.
I just saw Emerson's name pop up.
Okay.
Emerson, are you on? In the meantime,
Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes, Stephen, can you pull up that little other mackerel mesh presentation? Yeah, we can hear you, Emerson.
Thank you.
Give us a second to pull that up. I sent it the other day. It's on the website, so if you don't have it, you can just it's in the presentation folder. I think if it's not, it's on the website. You can just go to the website and click on mackerel mesh. It's a little secondary presentation. There we go. Thanks.
Okay, apologize for that, Emerson. You are queued up, so whenever you're ready, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Executive Director Moore, and thank you, Jason, for providing me with a few minutes for a brief review of a recent industry-funded and supported mackerel mesh selectivity pilot study. My name is Emerson Hasbrook, and I'm with the Cornell Marine Program, Long Island, New York. I promised Jason that I would be quick with this presentation. I don't think I can talk as fast as Anna though, but I'll give it a try. So next slide, please. This was a cooperative research study funded by the participants. There was no external funding for this project. So in terms of the collaborators, Glenn Goodwin and Seafreeze in Rhode Island, they provided the fishing vessel Prevail for 2 days, covered all vessel costs. The Cornell Marine Program in New York, myself, Alex Mercado, and Mike Bowen. We provided 2 onboard scientists, also data analysis. We provided the actual trouser trawl and the cod ends for the project, as well as project coordination. Malcolm McClintock in New York, owner and captain of the fishing vessel Bulldog, volunteered to be on board and assist with on-deck work. NIMS Cooperative Research Branch, Katie Viduchik, and Andy Jones. So 1 onboard scientist as well as data analysis. And thanks to Anna for having some of her staff participate. Also Superior Trawl in Rhode Island, John Knight. He provided work on the trouser trawl and on the cod ends to prepare for the study. Captain Mark Phillips and crew of the Prevail provided vessel operations and fishery knowledge. And I also wanted to thank Eric Reed for helping with some of the background coordination for this project. Next, please. So the purpose for this is there is currently no minimum mesh size in the mackerel trawl fishery, and the fishing industry wants to explore a minimum mesh size. So the objective was to determine the mackerel size selectivity of 2 different cod ends compared to a control. So we looked at an 8 centimeter square mesh cod end, a 9 centimeter diamond mesh cod end against a 2 1/8 inch diamond control. And the control is essentially the squid liner. And then also the 8 centimeter square and the 9 centimeter diamond are also the mesh sizes used by industry to meet the butterfish mesh regulations. And our methods were to compare the experimental and control length frequencies using a trouser trawl, 1 leg with the experimental cod end and 1 leg with the control cod end. For anyone who's not familiar with a trouser trawl, it's essentially a standard trawl that gets divided a little bit behind the fishing circle into 2 legs, like a trouser, a pair of legs in a trouser, pair of pants, so that you can put 1 cod end on 1 leg, another on the other, and you get direct comparison. We had 2 days of fishing, 1 day with each experimental cod end. Next, please. Okay, so some of the results. So for length frequencies, the left panel is the 8 centimeter square. The green are the length frequencies of the experimental cod end, the brown, the length frequencies of the control. There's no statistical difference between the length frequencies of these cod ends, and you can see some of the statistics listed in the table below. And I'll explain in a couple of minutes the non-significant result for the 8 centimeter square. The right-hand panel is a 9 centimeter diamond. The blue color is the length frequency for the experimental. The brown is for the control. And there's a highly significant difference with fewer small fish in the experimental. Next. We also plotted the selectivity curves for both experimental cod ends. So the shaded regions are the 95% confidence interval around the dark line plot. And the color plots along the top and bottom margins indicate the density at length of the experimental green or blue length frequencies and the control brown color. And in a way that's similar to the previous slide I just showed. So for the 8 centimeter square on the left, there really is not much of a difference in selectivity. However, for the 9 centimeter diamond on the right-hand panel, there is a selectivity for fewer small fish. Next. So in summary, the project provides some data to evaluate mesh size performance, but lacks the resolution needed to fully characterize selectivity. The 9 centimeter diamond selected for significantly larger, or in other words, released small mackerel. The 8 centimeter square showed almost identical mean lengths as the control. And the primary reason for that, we believe, is that on day one, when we fished that 8 centimeter square mesh, the mackerel catch was nearly all large fish. There were very few small fish caught that day to escape through that experimental cod end. On day two, with the diamond mesh, it was more of a mix of sizes. We had a limited number of paired toes, so we had low statistical power. The current results can initiate a discussion about mesh size in the mackerel fishery, and additional data may be desired, but will require a more robust study. So again, thank you for a few minutes for me to present this, and that's what I have for today. I'd be happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you very much, Emerson. So I'll look around the table first. Questions or comments on this work for questions for Emerson? Okay, not seeing anything around the table. I'll go out to the public. Any questions or comments on the work here? I see a hand from Eric Reed. Eric, go ahead.
We're not hearing you, Eric. You need to unmute or something.
Eric, we're still not hearing you. We also have Jeff Kalin's hand up, so I'm going to go to Jeff and then I'll come back to you, Eric. Go ahead, Jeff.
Thank you, Joe. Yeah, Emerson, thanks, and I appreciate the heads up on this a couple of days ago. Did you interact with any herring at all during those tows that you had? Just curious if there was any mixing of herring.
No, we caught pretty much almost all mackerel. We also had a large catch of butterfish, so it was mackerel and butterfish.
And butterfish,
Yeah, so we have selectivity information on butterfish as well.
Okay.
But no,
well,
really.
Thanks for taking. Yeah, okay. Yeah. Well, thanks for taking the initiative, Glenn and everybody else. So very interesting work. Thanks very much.
Okay, thank you, Jeff. I'm going to, Eric, you want to give it another shot?
Yeah, how about now, Mr. Chairman?
Yeah, you sound good.
Yeah, okay, perfect. Thank you. So I just have a brief comment about this whole project. You know, I really want to commend the collaborators. You know, they came up with the project and they worked together seamlessly to develop and execute this project. They donated a variety of expertise, as mentioned by Mr. Hasbrook. And, you know, they thought enough of beginning to fill the data gap of mesh selectivity data, which we really don't have, of cod ends in the mackerel fishery. And, you know, it mentions 2 days of seed time. It was probably a week of vessel time, et cetera, you know, so, and they're foregoing a lot of income for this. So I really commend them for that. But, you know, the whole purpose of this is to, you know, get data so we can prove that, you know, there is a mesh that lets smaller mackerel escape. And, you know, we spent, I don't know, 4 or 5 years conserving mackerel, and we're trying to develop gear that continues to do so. You know, we don't want to get into a position where we open a mackerel fishery and, you know, the difference between people who fish for mackerel in tons and pump them in the trucks and people who fish for large mackerel, which are really valuable in the market now, is substantially different. And we have to make sure we shepherd the resource and the market at the same time. So appreciate the effort, and hopefully the council will move forward on this on the next round, because I think it was a really, really excellent effort and well worthwhile. Thank you.
Thanks, Eric. Appreciate the comments, and I want to share the kudos there for the folks that, especially everyone that volunteered time there. We do have one other hand, and that's Jim Fletcher. Go ahead, Jim.
Is there any information regarding the fish that pass through the net, breaking the slime or the scales, and that leading toward mortality? Japan did some studies in it, and they went to smaller rather than larger nets. So my question, do you have any information on mortality of the fish that pass through the nets? Thank you, James Fletcher, United National Fishermen's Association.
We do not have any information on that. That was not part of the study design.
Okay. Thanks again, Emerson. Appreciate that. And Jason?
Yeah, in general, mackerel are very sensitive to disruption. Even if they look okay, it disrupts their ability to maintain like a salt fresh balance. But as Anna noted, I mean, they can tolerate a certain amount of handling. The folks in Canada have gotten really good at catching, tagging, releasing, and survival because they see them moving around in the acoustic arrays or getting eaten. So they can tolerate some handling and contact, but they are among the more sensitive. Pretty much any skin contact, the mackerels may swim away with a dry human hand, but that fish is a goner.
Thanks, Jason. Mike?
Yeah, thanks, Emerson, for the report, and thanks to all the participants for, as Eric said, strong collaboration. I guess my question is sort of what's next. Is this just information for the council to think about and maybe develop into a priority action for 2027, or Emerson, are you looking for to continue this in sort of the next phase of work? Has the advisory panel had a chance to take a look at this research and maybe come up with some recommendations for the council? Just kind of want to make sure that we have a understanding of what the next steps might be.
From my perspective, both of your options in terms of looking for funding. If the council has some funds, or if NIMS has some funds to put toward, that's great. In the meantime, we continue to look for funds for an expanded study. We had been looking for funding over the past year or more for a mesh selectivity study for mackerel. We're not successful in obtaining funds. And that's when industry stepped up and said, well, let's just do something. Let's see if we can do a proof of concept. What can we all volunteer to put this together? And that's how this came about. But we'll continue to look for funding.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate it. All right. Jason?
I'll just flag. Kind of assisting in developing and implementing a mesh selectivity study is a possible addition number 67 on the implementation plan. And it's Emerson and was kind of chatting with me saying that they were doing this. And he was wondering, okay, well, do these results as they are, could they be actionable? I said, well, the council doesn't have any mackerel actions. This year we're pretty fully booked. Next year we'll be doing mackerel specifications, and whatever results they have, whether this kind of more piloty or something more, that could be something the council could consider in some future implementation plan.
So something to talk about in October then. Yeah. Okay. That sounds good to me. All right. Katie, apologize for the false start. We're going to go back to the Science Center for our next agenda item, which is an overview of the Fisheries Monitoring and Research Division. And whenever you're ready, Katie, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, you sound great.
Perfect, thank you. Well, first, I just want to thank you very much to the council for allowing me to provide an update today. For those that don't know me, my name is Katie Mackerel. I'm the director of the Fishery Monitoring and Research Division. FMRD is one of the 5 scientific divisions at the NEFSC. Next slide, please. So today I'm going to provide a brief overview of our organizational structure and where we stand now. I'll also provide an overview of our standard bycatch reporting methodology and the 3-year review, which we're undergoing soon. I will provide a coverage rate accomplishment update on our Northeast Fishery Observer Program, or NEFOP, and industry-funded Scup, or IFS, programs. And I'll talk about our biological port sampling and our NEFOP contract merge update. Next slide, please. So introduction to our mission and organization. Next slide. So just a reminder of what our division's mission is. So we work very hard to collect information from commercial fisheries to support the use of that information and help inform fishery science and management. We strive to bring the fisherman's perspective into the federal process through collaboratively producing scientific information. And we work very hard to be a trusted presence among the fishing, scientific, and management communities. Each year, we have an annual strategic plan that helps guide our division's priorities and initiatives. Next slide, please. So there are 3 major branches that fall within the division. There's the Training and Data Quality branch, the Fisheries Monitoring Operations branch, and the Data and Information Systems branch. Next slide. So to briefly touch upon what these branches do, starting on the left, the Fisheries Monitoring Operations branch, first and foremost, focuses on the safety of observers at sea. They're more the operation side of the house. So they're looking at our sea day coordination and accomplishments. They work directly with the industry for our pre-trip notification system for fisheries that require to notify. And they work very closely with all of our providers working on trip selection, port sampling, and our operational component of electronic monitoring. Our Training and Data Quality branch focuses on our debriefing, our auditing, our entry, our trip accounting when trips first come in, go through this branch, our incidental take processing, as well as our electronic monitoring QA/QC and review sits in this branch. And finally, our Data and Information Systems branch is kind of our IT component within our division specifically. They focus on both data and database management, our application development, systems integration, electronic technology, and data modernization. And I'll talk a little bit about the work they're doing at the end of this actually, no, sorry, that's for the New England. Next slide, please. So you can jump to the next slide. So this is the standard bycatch reporting methodology review. So this slide is just a quick review of the Omnibus Amendment and their requirements. So starting in the fall, we began our analysis like we do every year to be implemented in the spring of each year. So this presentation is really focusing on how we did this past SBRM year. So April 1st, 2025 through March 31st, 2026. So the Omnibus Amendment was implemented in February of 2008 with the revision made in July of 2015. This amendment does require an annual discard report utilizing information obtained from both our NEFOP and ISM program for 14 federally managed species groups and sea turtles. Each year, discard estimates and variability are derived from the prior year data to inform our observer coverage needs for the upcoming year. So last year's data will be used to basically drive what we're going to do the next year. Next slide, please. There were 4,372 SBRM sea days allocated this SBRM year. Of those, a little over 2,300 are agency funded and a little over 2,000 are industry funded. There are 350 sea days allocated in 2025 via MMPA funding. These days are limited gillnet coverage, which are achieved across multiple gillnet fleets in New England and the Mid-Atlantic region to document protected species interactions. In addition to those 350 days, 43 additional days were allocated via the Office of Protected Resources, OPR, for monitoring the gillnet effort in the Mid-Atlantic region for bottlenose dolphin days. Those have been challenging to achieve this year. And there's also 6 CSA funded days. Those days are specific to limited gillnet effort in state waters in order to fill gaps in the observer coverage of our NEFOP SBRM task days. And finally, our annual sea day schedule, it does begin on April 1st, but it does require a review process. So we did roll it out a little bit after that. However, the provider was informed of the days they needed to target by April 1st. Permit holder letters explaining our coverage and regulations were sent to high coverage fleets as well. Next slide, please. So we are moving into our 3-year review. So this is a full analysis. It's conducted in the upcoming SBRM review, which is this year. This is much different than we did in 2023. That was a pared down version because the previous year's data, we were dealing with COVID-19, and with COVID-19, we had a blanket waiver for several months of a year. So for this review, it will be a full review. It's using data from July of 2022 through June of 2025. As you know, an FMAP PDT has been formed to complete the work. That's comprised of you all, the New England Council and Atlantic State, and both the Center and GARFO. The time frame to get this work done is now until the winter of 2027, and that report will be published by the NEFSC. Next slide, please. And I'll briefly just go over what they're looking for and what they're looking at for the 3-year review. So there's going to be a review of our recent levels of observer coverage, as well as our observed encounters with each species in each fishery or fishing mode. It's going to review the coefficient of variation of the discard information, as well as the total amount of discards associated with each fishing mode. There will be an evaluation of the effectiveness of the SBRM, as well as the implications of the discard information collected under the SBRM. There'll be a description of the methods used to collect the reported CVs. And finally, there'll be an updated assessment of potential sources of bias. Next slide, please. So now I'm going to touch upon our NEFOP and IFS Day accomplishments. Thank you. So, so this data, like I said, is from April 1st, 2025 through March 31st, 2026. I'm pleased to say that over 93% of the observer program C days, so this is all of our SBRM, MMPA, and ESA, have been achieved for that year. We did have some challenges. So staff turnover, transitioning NEFOP staff due to staff cut-offs and loss of experienced staff. We had our federal government shutdown, and then also the Department of Homeland Security shutdown did affect us directly because vessels do need to have a valid Coast Guard decal in order for the observer to deploy, and that did prevent those from happening at the dock. And then, of course, we had the tragic loss of the fishing vessel Lily Jean. So we held observers in for 5 days when that happened, and then obviously, as one would expect, there's been somewhat an unstable cadre of observers post that tragedy. Next slide, please. So this slide is showing their SBRM tasked and accomplished sea days. So the figure on the left is showing the annual sea days tasked by fleet category. So each funding category's sea days are stacked on top of each other. So this graph depicts the total sea days tasked for the year, and each color represents a subset of days allocated to that funding category. The right figure, the annual sea days accomplished, is by fleet. So this graph depicts the percent of sea days accomplished out of the total task for that funding category. Every year, when we start our SBRM analysis, the total number of tasked days in past years has decreased due to a flat budget, but rising costs. So most years, if we're fully funded, the SBRM calls for anywhere from 8,000 to 12,000 sea days. But funding shortfalls, those triggers prescribe a prioritization process where we can generally afford to do anywhere from 2,000 to 4,000 days, as it's been for the past several years. Like I said, our Mid-Atlantic MMPA and ESA days have continued to provide, have been challenging to accomplish. Gillnet effort diminishes, there's less vessels, they're spread out in small ports with effort highly dependent on catch and weather. Next slide, please. The next several slides display coverage trends over the past 10 SBRM years. I'll be displaying midwater trawl, bottom trawl, and gillnet gear. So on this slide, the figure on the left shows annual tasks and accomplished sea days in the midwater trawl fleet. This is separated by Mid-Atlantic and New England region. So the SBRM Northeast task days have generally decreased over time, then stabilized. The figure on the right shows the annual coverage rate, so observed sea days over total effort. So the red being Mid-Atlantic and the blue is the New England coverage. Coverage rates vary between regions, with the New England consistently maintaining higher coverage due to higher effort levels in this region. And as a reminder, in July of 2021, industry-funded monitoring of the Atlantic carrying fleet was implemented as an operational program. However, it was suspended in 2023 due to a lack of infrastructure funding to support the program. Next slide, please. Here on the left, you'll see tasked and accomplished sea days split between small mesh and large mesh bottom trawl for both regions. SBRM small mesh sea days have generally declined across the New England region over time, and the Mid-Atlantic small mesh has had several peaks in tasked SBRM sea days, most notably in 2016, 2019, and 2023. The most recent peak in SBRM 2023 small mesh task days were due to groundfish and loggerhead turtles, the top two species groups that were driving those sea days. And our large mesh task sea days have declined across both regions since SBRM in 2019, but generally stabilized after that. Next slide, please. And to round this out, this is the gillnet coverage trend. So the small mesh task gillnet days, they did drastically reduce over time in the Mid-Atlantic region. And these are SBRM days, not MMPA days. In the New England task days, they consistently are pretty low across the time series. And you can see in 2021 and 2025, and they are low in both regions. The large mesh SBRM task days remain fairly low across both regions. And there is a consistent downward trend in effort in both regions as well. Next slide, please. So before I move on to industry-funded scallop coverage, I just wanted to touch upon an update on our spiny dogfish sampling. As I understand, this has come up at the Mid-Atlantic Council in the past. It seems that there was some interest in increasing our samples for spiny dogfish. So we began investigating if spiny dogfish could be sampled at a processor where the majority of spiny dogfish were being processed. We have spoken to the processor prior to the transition of the biological port sampling program from GARFO to the NEFSC. So I'll talk a little bit more about that. But before we move to going solely to the processor, we wanted to see how successful we could be with this new merge and how many samples we collected for spiny dogfish. Since that transition occurred on October 1st, 2025, there have been 297 spiny dogfish links collected in the Mid-Atlantic region and 1,750 links collected in the Northeast region. This equates to 106% of the requested samples. Additionally, and I'll also touch upon this during the biological port sampling portion of this presentation, all of our observers were instructed to prioritize the sampling of spiny dogfish. This occurred in March of this year. So spiny dogfish was already a priority, but we made it the highest priority. These data are loaded into CAMs. They will be made available for stock assessments, and we will continue to prioritize our efforts to ensure we are maximizing the collection of spiny dogfish samples. And we can absolutely renew the conversations with the processor if needed, but we're currently evaluating whether additional port sampling in the BPS program, now that they have transitioned, that program has transitioned to the NEFSC is needed. Next slide, please. For industry-funded scallop, the total tasked days for FY25 is 2,046 days. The annual observer set-aside is 1% of the ABC, the annual, allowable biological catch. So the number of sea days available for observer coverage is directly tied to the available biomass. There has been decreasing ABCs and therefore less available sea days to cover the SBRM requirements. So we used to track that using a target coverage rate, but we've moved to sea days. This reduces the risks of exceeding the observer set-aside. Our notification compliance, so they have to notify through the pre-trip notification system, has maintained over 85% across this fishing year. And the scallop fishery has a self-service rate of just entering their own trips opposed to calling us consistently at 78%. So we're quite pleased with that. Next slide, please. In fishing year 2025, this observer program completed 88% overall of the task sea days across all fleets. The limited access fleet had an accomplished coverage rate of anywhere from 33 to 114%, depending on the area. The Northern Gulf of Maine accomplishment rate for LACG is 128%. The limited access general category dredge fleet had an accomplished coverage rate anywhere from 69 to 105%. This is not including the Northern Gulf of Maine. And the scallop trawl fleet had an accomplished coverage percent rate of 13%. This fleet has been historically challenging to cover due to port location and difficulty in capturing the effort when it occurs. Next slide, please. So the last part of this is to talk about our biological port sampling and our NEFSC contract merge. So the Science Center recently took on the biological port sampling program, which has historically been managed by GARFO. With that transfer, we merged the biological port sampling contract with the Northeast Fishery Observer contract, so the at-sea component of data collection. Why did we do that? So we felt that the observer program is structured and suited to take on the biological port sampling responsibilities. Many regions in the nation have already folded biological port sampling into their observer programs, thereby paving the way for the Northeast to follow suit. Although I have discovered that we are very unique and, have created a lot of our own protocols and policies as we've gone through this process. Moving the core GARFO program, so that's historic program, to the NEFSC, we're hoping that it would improve sample target efficiency and data collection adaptability, as we do have staff, our observers, who could be cross-trained into this program, home ported all over the region, so easier access to dealers. And then, of course, the centralized management can enhance our sampling oversight. It aligns our requirements with our research and management goals. It increases our communication across biosampling program. And it really, we work with PopDice so closely anyway through our regular C-Day program, Population Dynamics branch within READ at the Northeast Fisheries Science Center. So this just, continue to enhance our communication and build flexibility guidelines whenever needed. Next slide, please. This slide is a summary of our contract actions over the past year. So GARFO in the center, we worked hard on aligning the end and the start date of all of these various contracts. So we had 2 GARFO contracts, a QAQC, and then their operational contract, and we had our own observer operational contracts. So we worked hard to make sure that these could all end and begin at the same time, but that is challenging to do. So we were awarded the NEFSC contract to AIS. This is the same provider that supplies the port sampling services under the core GARFO contract. We fully intended to merge the NEFSC and GARFO contracts. However, when we fully funded the GARFO contract, because we were not ready to execute our merged contract, that there was a risk that we would not be able to deob and reob the money that was on the GARFO contract. So what we decided to do is co-manage those 2 contracts at the same time, in order to minimize risk of losing any funds that were going towards this project. So the COR of that program, Vic, and the COR of our program, Nikki, work weekly in ensuring that these programs are essentially working at one, but managed by 2. They work very closely together to do that. So this GARFO contract is expected to end in July of 2026. It will end. We are prioritizing the kind of spending the funds off that first, so we don't lose any of the funding, which we are expected to spend. And then starting on August 1st, the sampling program will be managed by the division under one contract. Next slide, please. We are working directly with provider staff. This is improving communications in the field. We're in direct communication with assessment staff, which allows them to further refine the sample request lists to increase the number of samples they want and when they want them. We are tracking accomplishments weekly and developing a sample verification process to ensure samples are collected and uploaded properly and according to timelines. We have updated our manuals recently. We're trying to keep the project on track, provide documentation for future updates, and again, working closely with the scientists in order to document decisions made for tracking purposes. We've conducted in-person outreach with dealer facilities since the execution of this new program in October across the region to ensure samplers have safe access to facilities and to convey the important use of the samples. Next slide. So this is a map of our active samplers, including both core GARFO samplers and NEFSC samplers. There are a total of 14 active samplers across the region. That includes 5 core samplers, the blue bubbles, and 8 NEFSC samplers, the gray bubbles. The distribution of the samplers creates more opportunities for sampling across the region. I will note that we did train 30 biological port samplers, but again, due to the very rough winter that we had and the tragedy and the loss of one of our observers, our attrition rates have been very high. And so I would say most of the success has been for these core samplers that have stayed with the program. And of course, I understand the reasons why those that left. We also have some of our staff, the area coordinators, program managers, and our staff that are trained as samplers to help support and fill the gaps when needed. Next slide, please. So I think part of the reason for our success is due in part to our devoted outreach with the dealers. So we did in-person outreach at 15 different dealers to communicate change in the program management and reinforce the goals. And we also established connection with new dealers to increase sampling for hard-to-find species. And in addition to outreach with dealers, we're working with other stakeholders, including states and technical committees. For example, we did provide updates to the Atlantic Herring Technical Committee in March, and we are collaborating with the committee to share information. And what I learned from that is that there's a lot more work that we can do with the states in order to continue to build efficiencies and improve our sampling overall. Next slide, please. So this is just going over the outreach that we've done so far this year. While we adopted the program in October, that unfortunately coincided with the 45-day government shutdown. Therefore, our outreach efforts had to be delayed. So beginning in January, we've done a thorough job in trying to reach as many ports and dealer facilities as possible. We started with visits in the Northeast to ports and dealers in Gloucester, Boston, New Bedford, and Chatham. That was in this winter. And then also in this winter, we went to Southern New England to Point Judith and Stonington and hit another about half a dozen dealers. And then we rounded that out with our Mid-Atlantic outreach in Montauk and several areas of New Jersey to another about half a dozen dealers. Next slide, please. So this is what we've been able to do so far. So this is showing you our portside length accomplishments, specifically for Q1, Q2. The quarters for our biological port sampling program aligned with fiscal year quarters. So Q1 is October through December. Q2 is January through March. So this just gives you a direct comparison of length accomplishments of the data we have available compared to previous years by quarter. This is a more concrete comparison of accomplishments since the lengths have actually been achieved. I would say, as far as the results go, overall, we are meeting sample requests, and specifically, Q2 is the best quarter for achieved lengths historically. And I just want to reiterate, this is a program that we are aligned with GARFO still, and a lot of these achievements are in fact due to them and both the center working together. So we're very appreciative of that ability to shadow the program. The sampling requests this year are higher than previous years, and we are collectively meeting our sampling requirements. Next slide, please. So this slide is focused on our portside age accomplishments for Q1 and Q2. So this gives a direct comparison compared to previous years. The table on the right includes achieved age samples by quarter, and this also demonstrates that we are meeting or exceeding our accomplishments compared to previous years. So I'm pleased to say that. Q2 was our strongest quarter, both percent-wise and amount collected. Those species with low age collection include mackerel and white hake. Typically, mackerel age structures are difficult to collect, and white hake are typically processed very quickly, gutted and headed off of the dealer, and thus without the head, we're not able to collect age structures. Next slide, please. So as far as program developments go, we are continuing to commit to find efficiencies to the sampling program. What I've learned leading the division here is that this is it's not something that we can just like sprint. This is a slow jog, and with that slow jog, I continue to see us building efficiencies and making improvements and increasing our sample size. So that's sort of lessons learned that I'm seeing so far. One thing that we worked with PopDye on is seeing if we could focus on a couple unclassified, i.e. not needing a market category at the dealer species, to improve our sampling at sea that could be used in addition to the ones that are collected at the dealer. So that includes spiny dogfish and red hake. So we started sampling, or we didn't start sampling them at sea. We increased the priority of them starting in March of this year. The goal is really to investigate which stock would be best sampled. The priority 1 status was determined to be used for both of these species. And these species are both, like I said, sampled at sea and at the port. PopDye thought that these stocks would be provided good contrast. So spiny dogfish are nearly ubiquitous, while red hake are much more rarely encountered. So having these kind of 2 different types, we hoped that this would give us a better feel for which stocks are best sampled at sea, if we would like to continue this change in priority status and expand this at sea biological port sampling program in FY27. Next slide. So there are challenges, of course. I don't think this is not new to anybody. So there is the multi-stock sampling problem. This is for species that require a market category at the dealer, but they're caught from vessels that are fishing in multiple stock areas. Traditionally, those species or those fish are generally ignored because you can't identify which stock area it's caught in. There's also the historic landing samples included on the sample request list. Those can be difficult to track and find. There's challenges accessing samples due to low landings that are driven by seasonality and changes in fishing activity. Like I said, there's specialized handling of select species, which impacts availability, winter flounder being another example. And then obviously our observer and sampler attrition has been higher than it traditionally is due to the tragic winter that we had in the Lily Jean. And there's also the contractor and program merger learning curve. I'm not even sure this is a challenge. This is more of kind of a blessing that we've been able to work alongside Garfo and continue to just grow stronger as we build off what they've already built. Next slide, please. So future initiatives. So we are moving forward. We're working to merge the time frame for port sampling request lists to begin to align with the SBRM NEFSC day schedule. So like I said, the biological port sampling program year begins October 1st and our CDA schedule starts April 1st. We have one provider under one contract who's managing this. So we are looking to align those. So starting in 2027, there'll be a new schedule for the port sampling program. So it will align starting on April 1st with our CDA schedule. We will continue to collaborate with PopDye to better communicate how the sample request lists and stock assessments are developed. We want to do this to increase transparency in the program. And in fact, we just published the sample request list on our website. So that is available already. And we're continuing to work with our stock assessment partners to consider options for extending the biological port sampling program through our at-sea observer collection. We're working closely with the states to streamline sampling efforts and increase coordination. So that is something that I see our ability to build that relationship as we kind of build our roots here at the center. And then finally, I think one of the biggest challenges and one that we are taking very seriously and prioritizing here at the center is that we're continuing to research how to explore efficiencies and flexibilities as it relates to samples from split stock area trips and samples that require market category. So I've already met with our partners on the stock assessment side, as well as John, and we are investigating ways that we can improve and collect more samples for those market category fish that are caught in split stock areas. And with that, I think that's all I have. And again, I just want to thank the council very much for giving us the opportunity to present today. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Katie. I appreciate the presentation and just all the work you folks are doing and for carrying on through these challenging times. I'll just start off by saying I think the merger is a good thing. I'm pretty excited about it. So I'll look around the table. Are there any questions on the update? Okay. Not seeing any. Oh, sorry, Jason, you have your hand up. Go ahead.
So I had a few follow-up questions, but maybe I'll address them with them via email and forward it to the council. But on the 3-year SBRM review, so we do have 2 council staffers, me and person in New England. So if there are specific like observer topics that the council is interested in, forward that to Chris or myself. The SBRM 3-year review is fairly formulaic, like run through a number of analyses, but there is a little bit of room for exploring some different things. And I think 2 things that I've thought of kind of nudging a little bit on is I think for the last, I don't know, I guess 9 years, last 3 years, I think the SBRM review has recommended adding sturgeon somehow into SBRM. There hasn't been an ability to do that by the service. That's been a consistent recommendation of the PDT FMAT for the 3-year reviews, at least 2, maybe 3 reviews. And then another thing that we've kind of kicked around is, what are the logistics of like, so the ability of NIMS to shuffle observer coverage around towards council priority species was removed by a lawsuit a number of years ago. But, we've kind of kicked around, like with river hen and shad, could the councils jointly, omnibussly modify SBRM to maybe have a higher coverage level for midwater trawl if that's a priority of the councils? So there's any issues like that you'd like the 3-year, again, there's a lot of tasks that have to be done. It's fairly formulaic, but if there are specific observer related things that the council wants to kind of kick the tires on relay that to Chris or myself, and subject to the resource constraints of that review, we can try to address it as best as possible.
Yeah, thanks, Jason. I think that's a great way to handle it. There were a couple discussions earlier this morning that could probably be folded into that as well. But I did see one hand up. Chris, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks for the presentation, KB. On the slide where you showed, I guess, the outreach effort in the different ports, I thought you mentioned there was plans to visit other states and their ports. Is there the rough schedule on when you think you and your staff will be visiting ports in Virginia and North Carolina? And if so, do you plan on visiting multiple ports in those states? Thanks.
We are in the planning stages of going out in the field again. The operational staff at Fisheries Monitoring Operations is putting a kind of a framework or a plan together. Happy to share that when that's put together. I think it's in the early phases. So I don't know exactly where we're going, but I do know we are definitely hitting up multiple dealers. So I'm happy to share that with the council once that's been drafted.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. All right, I think that covers that agenda item. We're running a few minutes late, but I do want to take a break before we begin our next agenda item, which would be the Scup Winter One framework. And we're actually going to be joined by the ASMFC's Summer Flounder Scup and Black Sea Bass Management Board. And so we'll put 10 minutes up on the clock. We're going to start exactly at that time. So we'll give Hayden a chance to get ready, and then we'll dive right in. Thank you. We're going to get started in just a minute. If folks in the room could take their seats, we're going to get started. As I mentioned, our next agenda item is the Scup Winter One framework for the council. Hayden is going to be presenting. We are joined by ASMFC's Summer Flounder Scup and Black Sea Bass Management Board. I'm not going to recognize all the members by name. I do want to thank the staff that are here in person. So thank you to Chelsea, Bob, and Tony. And I will also acknowledge the chair of the board, John Maniscalco, who's online. John, I don't think I'm going to need to turn the mic over to you, but I will be recognizing any board members who have their hands up for questions or comments, along with council members. And I believe we have Tony at the table. So Tony, if you have any questions or comments, please just raise your hand if you think that there's something that the board needs to tackle. I'm happy to acknowledge you. And with that, we can get started. So I'll turn it over to Hayden when you're ready. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Mr. Chair. All right, so this is just an outline of everything we're going to go through during today's presentation. First, we'll review some background information. Then we'll move on to a draft range of alternatives that the FMAT has developed. And then we'll go over what next steps will look like. As a reminder, the objective for today's meeting is for the council to approve a range of alternatives for further analysis and development. And I just also wanted to note along the lines of what the chair just shared, this agenda item is joint between the council and the commission's Summer Flounder Scup and Black Sea Bass Management Board. And we're doing things a bit differently than we normally would because this council framework does not have a corresponding commission addendum at this point. However, the board is in attendance today and will participate in the discussion. I just wanted to flag that since the framework is currently a council-only action, During today's meeting, we would expect only council members to make motions modifying or approving the draft range of alternatives. And of course, the board is free to make their own motions as they see fit, but approving the framework alternatives presented today will be the business of the council. So back in April, when the council reviewed the landings threshold analysis, the conversation really focused on what happened with the 2026 Winter One fishery. And we'll touch on that in a moment, but I wanted to highlight that the council's evaluation of the Winter One trip limit requirements originated from conversations starting back in 2025. In June 2025, GARFO staff communicated some pre-existing implementation challenges with their Winter One trip limit reduction and recommended that the council consider building management flexibility into the relevant regulatory language. Then in August 2025, the council agreed with a council staff recommendation that there should be an analysis of landing patterns during the Winter One quota period, and that the council should consider initiating a management action to modify the Winter One regulations, if appropriate. Then in December of last year, the council agreed to include the analysis and consideration of a potential framework action as part of the 2026 implementation plan. And in early 2026, council staff conducted the analysis ahead of the April 2026 meeting. And before we review some of the main takeaways from the landings threshold analysis, I just wanted to provide a refresher on how the commercial scup quota is managed. The commercial scup fishery operates year-round, and there are 3 seasonal quota periods: Winter 1, Summer, and Winter 2, which are active during the dates shown on this table. The annual quota is allocated across these 3 periods using the percentages shown here, which are included in the council's FMP. During the winter periods, a coast-wide quota and possession limits are in effect, whereas in the summer period, quota is allocated and managed on a state-by-state basis through the commission process. Under federal regulations, the fishery is closed for the remainder of each period when the associated quota allocation has been harvested. Any overages of the winter and summer quota allocations must be repaid in the appropriate period of the following year. Under current specifications, the Winter 1 possession limit starts at 50,000 pounds and is reduced to 1,000 pounds once 80% of the Winter 1 quota is landed. Winter 2 begins with a 12,000 pound possession limit, which may increase if unused Winter 1 quota is rolled over. And while we're on the slide, I want to note one technicality. The council received a supplemental public comment requesting that a reduced Winter 1 trip limit be considered as a draft alternative in the framework action being discussed today. However, the Winter 1 trip limits are set through the specifications process, so any potential changes to the trip limits themselves are outside the scope of this framework. The framework may consider changes, though, to the Winter 1 trip limit requirements, and what I mean by trip limit requirements will become clearer as we walk through the draft alternatives. So continue on with some background information. The landings threshold analysis looked at recent Winter 1 trip limit reduction performance as well as landing patterns during the Winter 1 period. These graphs show weekly commercial scup landings during the Winter 1 period each year from 2023 to 2026. The dotted red line is the 80% threshold that triggers the Winter 1 trip limit reduction, and the red line is the full Winter 1 quota in each year. The red boxes indicate the date when the 80% threshold was exceeded each year. What you see here is a complete retrospective view of Winter 1 landings. During the Winter 1 period, GARFO monitors landings using dealer reports, state data, and other available information, including electronic vessel trip reports, and based on this information, makes decisions about whether the trip limit reduction or fishery closures must be implemented. Because the trip limit reduction is implemented based on realized or actual landings, there are data lags associated with catch reporting and data processing, as well as late reports from some dealers that obscure our understanding of what landings look like in real time. So in 2023, 2024, and 2025, when landings met the 80% threshold later on in the period ended before landings data reflected that the trip limit reduction should have been implemented. In 2026, the threshold was met very early on in Winter 1. So in theory, there should have been time to implement the required reduction. However, landings accrued so rapidly that by the time available data indicated that the threshold had been reached, the projections indicated that the full quota would be met before a trip limit adjustment could be implemented. Therefore, a closure was implemented on March 16th instead of a trip limit reduction. The agency could implement a closure more proactively than the reduction because the regulations as they currently exist allow the regional administrator to project when the winter one quota will be harvested and close the fishery on that date. Preliminary data show that the winter one quota was exceeded by 23% this year. Given the existing accountability measures for the commercial scup fishery, the full amount of this overage is required to be deducted from the 2027 winter one quota. So delayed data availability impacted implementation of the trip limit reduction across all of the recent years we just looked at, so 2023 to 2026. And these delays stem from data reporting and processing timelines, as well as late dealer reports, which are a primary source of data informing the reduction and quota period closures. Aside from data delays, the implementation challenges differed across the years. From 2023 to 2025, implementation of the reduction was also constrained by late threshold exceedance. And in 2026, the impact of data delays was exacerbated by an unusually rapid pace of landings, requiring a closure in place of a trip limit reduction. The landings threshold analysis also dug into the trip level landing patterns during the winter one period in recent years. And we won't go into great detail here since that was covered at the April council meeting, but commercial landings data indicate that from 2021 to 2025, there has been a gradual increase in the number of high volume commercial scup trips. And in the staff memo on this topic, I defined high volume as above 30,000 pounds per trip during the winter one period. And this pattern accelerated in 2026. Industry members commented that more effort may have been directed at Scup during the 2026 winter one fishery, perhaps due to increased demand and processing capacity in the frozen market, as well as limited opportunities in other fisheries. So returning to our timeline of how this framework action came about, in April 2026, the council reviewed that landings threshold analysis we just walked through and had a robust discussion about what precipitated the 2026 winter one overage and how such a situation could be avoided in the future. There was extensive public comment from stakeholders. Like I said before, some comments elaborated on what drove rapid landings this year. Other comments expressed a great deal of concern regarding fair and equitable access to the winter one fishery and how an early closure may have disproportionately impacted small historic businesses compared to larger operators. Staff recommended that the council consider revising the winter one trip limit requirements through a framework action to enhance management flexibility, noting potential regulatory revisions that GARFO staff had suggested back in June of 2025. The council agreed, noting that other options should also be included in the draft alternatives. And on the next slide, I'll attempt to summarize the full scope of options that the council discussed at their April meeting. In April, an FMAT was formed, and this group developed draft alternatives throughout the rest of April and May. And today, we are holding the first framework meeting for this action, in which the council will review and hopefully approve a draft range of alternatives for further development. So from my perspective, the council's conversation back in April can be distilled into two high-level questions. The first being, during the winter one period, what approach would be most effective at balancing quota utilization with the prevention of future overages? And the second question being, does it make sense to require repayment of seasonal quota overages, even if the annual quota has not been exceeded during the same year? This first question focuses on how to fine-tune implementation of the winter one trip limit reduction to balance quota utilization with preventing future overages. In April, council members expressed interest in exploring potential changes to how the reduction is implemented, as well as options for acquiring and using more timely in-season landings data for monitoring. The next question arose from concerns about the substantial landings overage repayment that is expected for the 2027 winter one fishery. In April, council members expressed interest in exploring potential modifications to the commercial landings-based accountability measures so that seasonal quota overages would not have to be repaid if the annual quota was not exceeded during the same year. Throughout the rest of this presentation, we'll walk through very specific draft alternatives for all three of the approaches summarized here. Drawing from the ideas discussed during the April council meeting, the FMAT drafted these purpose and need statements for the framework action. So as written here, the purpose of this action is to consider modifications to the commercial SCUP winter one trip limit requirements as specified in the regulations, reporting program, and accountability measures to enhance management flexibility during the winter one quota period. These modifications are intended to strike a balance between attaining quota utilization and constraining landings when necessary through timely implementation of the Winter 1 trip limit reduction and/or implementation of landings overage repayments. The need for this action is to prevent future overages of the Winter 1 quota, promote an even distribution of quota throughout the Winter 1 period, and avoid unnecessary landings overage paybacks in all quota periods when the annual quota is not exceeded. Stretching the Winter 1 quota throughout the period is crucial to ensuring equitable access to the resource, especially for smaller vessels. Avoiding unnecessary paybacks would reduce disruptions to the fishery when overages do not pose a risk to the health of the stock. And with that, we will dive into our draft alternatives. So first we have alternative set 1, which is modified Winter 1 trip limit requirements. And I'll just note that alternatives 1B and 1C could be selected individually or in combination. So, and I'll just preface this by saying for each alternative set, I'm going to provide a brief overview of the current regulations before we actually get into the alternatives themselves, because it seemed like a lot to give you all of the current regulations at once. So, like I said before, the trip limits and percentage threshold triggering a reduction can be modified through specifications. So that is outside the scope of what this framework considers. This framework considers modifications to the mechanisms behind the trip limit reduction. So under current regulations, it states that the monitoring committee shall recommend to the Mid-Atlantic Council and Commission the percent of landings attained at which the landing limit for the Winter 1 period will be reduced. So this implies that the trip limit reduction must be implemented based on actual landings, and there is no option to waive the reduction. Alternative 1A is the no action alternative. It would maintain the current Winter 1 trip limit requirements, meaning that the regional administrator must implement the reduction based on realized landings, and the reduction must be implemented if and when triggered. Under alternative 1B, the regional administrator would be allowed to implement the trip limit reduction based on projected commercial scup landings. And under alternative 1C, the regional administrator would be allowed to not implement the Winter 1 trip limit reduction if it is expected to prevent full harvest of the Winter 1 quota. So under no action, the current approach would be maintained, and as it currently exists, it limits flexibility in how the Winter 1 trip limit reduction can be applied and has led to some of those implementation challenges that I explained at the beginning of this presentation. Alternative 1B, which would allow the regional administrator to implement the reduction based on projections, would allow for more timely implementation of the Winter 1 trip limit reduction, because you wouldn't have to wait for actual landings to reflect that the 80% threshold has been exceeded. And alternative 1C would allow GARFO to preserve harvest opportunities when implementing the trip limit reduction would prevent full quota utilization in the Winter 1 period. And like I said before, these options could be selected individually or in combination, options 1B and 1C. So interestingly, the fishery management plan does not specify mechanisms for the system of winter period landing limits. It simply states that in the 2 winter periods, January to April and November to December, a coast-wide quota system would be implemented in conjunction with a system of landing limits. Landing limits would remain in effect until the fishery was closed by GARFO. Landing limits would be implemented by the states and the GARFO and could change over the period. So this means that the council's intent in the FMP has been interpreted in the regulations as requiring the use of actual landings to implement the Winter 1 trip limit reduction, and that the trip limit reduction is mandatory. So if the fishery management plan doesn't specify how the Winter 1 trip limit reduction should be implemented, why not make an administrative change to the regulations? Well, the current Winter 1 trip limit requirements reflect an interpretation of the council's intent in the FMP, and there's no record indicating that this interpretation is incorrect. So changing the requirements wouldn't just be a technical fix, it would be a policy shift altering the intent of the regulations. And for that reason, alternatives 1B and 1C are included here in the range of draft alternatives for the council to consider and vote on. The FMAT recommends that if the council approves alternative 1B and or 1C, changes should be addressed by removing language from the regulations rather than adding language to the fishery management plan, because adding overly prescriptive language to the FMP could reduce management flexibility in the future. All right, moving on to alternative set 2, modified catch reporting requirements. Like I said before, dealer reports are a primary source of information informing implementation of the winter one trip limit reduction and quota period closures, but vessel trip reports from federally permitted vessels are another source of landings data. Under current regulations, federally permitted dealers must report all scup landed for sale on a weekly basis, and federally permitted commercial vessels must submit trip reports within 48 hours of landing. So under the no action alternative, which is 2A, the current approach to catch reporting would be maintained. So weekly dealer reporting, and for commercial vessels submitting EVTRs within 48 hours of landing. Under alternative 2B, the council could consider changes to the EVTR and or dealer reporting timelines so that scup catch is reported on a reduced timeline, for example, within 24 hours. And then there's a bit more detail that goes into alternatives 2C and 2D, so I'll summarize those on separate slides. Alternative 2C would require federally permitted commercial vessels landing scup above a specified threshold to report scup catch daily via Vessel Monitoring System, or VMS. VMS uses satellite-based communications from an onboard transceiver to transmit fishing activity information, including vessel identification and location, and as part of a fishery monitoring. And the VMS unit also allows a vessel to submit trip information while at sea. There are some examples of other fisheries with VMS catch reporting requirements, including the ones you see listed here. And under alternative 2D, federally permitted commercial vessels would be required to report scup catch within a specified timeline via the interactive voice response system. So IVR reports historically provided an alternative to VMS by allowing applicable vessels to make triplet declarations by phone, typically within 24 hours of departure and return from port, return to port. And in addition to trip declarations, IVR is used for weekly landings reports in the herring fishery, to meet other requirements within the multi-species fishery, and to report trips taken under an exempted fishing permit by vessels without VMS. The phone-based IVR system is no longer operational, and both IVR reports and EVTRs come through the same online interface in Fish Online. Under alternative 2A, so back to the no action alternative, informal changes could be made to in-season monitoring procedures. For example, GARFO could consider whether EVTRs that have not been matched with corresponding dealer reports could be used when determining if the winter one trip limit reduction is necessary to be implemented. This would not require changes to the regulations, nor would it impose new requirements on the scup industry. However, the use of unmatched EVTRs would still present a data lag, because EVTRs may be submitted up to 48 hours after the end of a trip, and late reporting issues would not be resolved. Data indicate approximately 23% of EVTRs were submitted late during the 2021 to 2026 winter one quota periods. Moving on to alternative 2B, which is changing the EVTR and or dealer reporting timelines. Alternative 2B would support more timely implementation of the winter one trip limit reduction to more evenly distribute landings and reduce the risk of overages in the quota period. And this change would not impose novel reporting requirements or equipment costs on the scup industry. Instead, it would decrease the allowable time for submitting information the industry is already required to report. This alternative could be combined with the informal changes to in-season monitoring discussed under the no action alternative. As with those changes, this alternative would not fully resolve data lags due to late reporting. And to give you an idea of what reduced reporting timelines could look like, here are some examples of other fisheries in the greater Atlantic region with stricter reporting timelines than the weekly dealer reporting and 48-hour EVTR reporting requirements. that are currently in place for the commercial scup fishery. So for ILEX, dealers or processors reporting more than 10,000 pounds of squid from July 15th through December 31st must submit dealer reports within 48 hours of landing. And for tilefish, private recreational vessels must report catch via EVTR within 24 hours of returning to port. Alternatives 2C and 2D, which are the additional catch reporting requirements either through VMS or IVR, may provide more timely data to support implementation of the Winter 1 trip limit reduction. However, these options involve trade-offs. For example, there are differences in cost to industry and data timeliness, and both would likely require delayed implementation. So to give you a sense of the trade-offs between these two options for additional catch reporting requirements, I made this table. And as you can see on the left-hand side, there's different categories here: data, cost to industry, implementation timeline, and other considerations. So starting with VMS, because VMS is satellite-based and vessels would be able to submit trip information while at sea, it's possible that VMS could provide more real-time data compared to IVR, because IVR is dependent on internet connection. So vessels could only be reasonably expected to submit their catch reports when they have access to internet, and at-sea internet access is not required for commercial vessels. So there's potential for data delays there. Under VMS, there could be additional cost for vessels without existing VMS requirements from other fisheries. And this is because they would have to purchase a new VMS unit, which runs between $680 and $3,100, as well as pay for a data plan, which could cost between $60 and $200 per month. IVR would not impose additional costs to industry because it would not require the purchase of a new device or data plan, since it operates through Fish Online, which commercial scup fishermen already use to submit EVTRs. Both VMS and IVR would impose additional time burdens associated with new reporting requirements, since fishermen do not already report scup catch through these platforms. Moving on to the expected implementation timeline for both of these options. Reporting requirements impose a time burden and associated costs in the industry, and such collections of information require review and clearance by the Office of Management and Budget under the Paperwork Reduction Act. So while current VMS and IVR reporting requirements have received Paperwork Reduction Act clearance, these alternatives would increase the amount of information collected via VMS and IVR. So GARFO would have to report changes to the existing collections to the Office of Management and Budget, and that office would need to clear any changes before new reporting requirements could be implemented. For both alternatives, the implementation timeline could also be delayed because GARFO technical development staff would need to develop programming to process and display new scup landing data, and VMS reporting would require additional programming of the VMS unit to enable a scup VMS declaration, a daily scup landing reporting form, and a scup pre-land form. These changes require programming updates within the VMS system, which are contracted to a vendor and may take up to 6 months. The FMAT didn't offer any recommendations between these two potential catch reporting alternatives, VMS and IVR. However, given the possibility that the IVR program could be eliminated in the future and the benefit of VMS providing more real-time data, FMAT members had suggested that maybe the council would be interested in moving alternative 2D to considered but rejected. But of course, that's just a suggestion, and it's up to the council to decide if the draft range of alternatives should be modified. When thinking about the intent behind adding new reporting requirements, the FMAT discussed how the motivation would be rooted in acquiring more timely landings information rather than imposing strict reporting requirements. So FMAT members suggested an approach to achieve more real-time monitoring while limiting the burden on industry. The FMAT recommends that if the council approves alternative 2C for inclusion in the range of alternatives, daily VMS reporting should be limited to vessels landing above a certain threshold per trip, and the FMAT recommends a threshold of 10,000 pounds. The 10,000 pound per trip threshold is intended to limit the VMS reporting requirement to vessels that catch the majority of the Winter 1 quota and already have VMS. Since 2021, at least 70% of Winter 1 scup landings per year can be attributed to trips landing above 10,000 pounds, with the proportion increasing in recent years. And moving on to that second data point here, the data shown on the slide indicates high VMS coverage for trips above 10,000 pounds. However, there's been a late-breaking update to this information. It turns out that in the last 3 years, so 2024, 2025, and 2026, all vessels landing over 10,000 pounds during the winter one period had VMS. So 100% of those trips were covered. And from 2021 to 2023, there was only one vessel operating at that threshold that didn't have VMS. In the briefing materials, the FMAT also provided 15,000 pounds as an alternative threshold, and in the last 4 years, all vessels landing over 15,000 pounds had VMS. All right, so moving on to our final set of draft alternatives, modified commercial landing accountability measures. There are two types of accountability measures for the commercial scup fishery, landings-based and non-landings-based. Under the landings-based AMs, any overages of the seasonal quota period allocations must be repaid in the appropriate quota period of the following year. This applies to the winter and summer quota periods. For example, the 2026 winter one quota overage must be deducted from the 2027 winter one quota allocation. There are also non-landings-based AMs that apply when commercial discards have contributed to ACL overages. Under this system of AMs, stock status is considered when determining whether a scaled repayment should be applied to the commercial ACT, or annual catch target. The landings-based AMs are outlined here in red because this framework only considers modifications to the landings-based accountability measures. So starting with alternative 3A, this is the no action alternative. It would maintain the current landings-based accountability measures for the commercial scup fishery. Under alternative 2B, the regional administrator would be allowed to not require repayment of landings overages for the winter 1, summer, and winter 2 quota periods if the annual commercial scup quota was not exceeded during the same year. And under alternative 2C, the text at the beginning of this is the same as 2B, so the regional administrator would be allowed to not require repayment if the annual scup quota was not exceeded during the same year, but there's the added requirement that spawning stock biomass must be at or above the target as defined by the most recent stock assessment. So 2C is just different from 2B because it also takes stock status into consideration. The review of winter one fishery performance and landings patterns highlighted that scup commercial quota is typically very well controlled to the annual and seasonal quotas. So the 2026 winter one overage was an unprecedented incident resulting from a perfect storm of factors, as the council discussed back in the April 2026 meeting, including unusually rapid landings and some late dealer reporting. It's unclear if the pace of landings observed in 2026 will occur again in the future, but generally speaking, there's been this underlying increase in high volume scup trips with the 80% threshold being met more consistently. So if this trend continues, there could be an increased likelihood of quota period overages and paybacks impacting the commercial scup fishery. Preliminary data indicate that the 2026 winter one quota was exceeded by 1.8 million pounds. This means that under the current AMs, which would be maintained under the no action alternative for this alternative set, the expected 2027 winter one quota of 7.02 million pounds would be reduced to 5.22 million pounds. Stakeholders have expressed concern that if the 2026 annual quota is not exceeded, repayment of the winter one quota overage would impose unnecessary economic hardship on fishermen without providing any meaningful conservation benefit to the scup stock. So both alternatives 3B and 3C under this alternative set would add flexibility to the landings-based accountability measures by creating the option to waive quota period overage repayments if the annual quota is not exceeded during the same year. And with 3C, you have that added consideration of stock status. So 3C is slightly more conservative with that requirement that biomass is at or above the target level as defined in the most recent stock assessment. And for these alternatives, the FMAT identified a potential implementation challenge related to the timing of final catch reporting or accounting. Commercial landings for a given year typically aren't finalized until the fall of the next year. So for example, 2026 landings will not be finalized until the fall of 2027. This presents a timing challenge because the winter one and summer periods would likely end before GARFO could determine if the annual quota was exceeded in the year prior and whether paybacks in those periods were necessary. So the FMAT has been kind of talking through how that challenge could be addressed. We already walked through the first half of this framework timeline, but as a reminder, today is framework meeting 1, when the council will approve a draft range of alternatives for further development. Looking ahead, the FMAT will continue to meet and develop the framework over the summer, and we'll gain advisory panel input at an upcoming meeting, actually at the beginning of next week. The council prioritized an expedited timeline for this framework to ensure that potential regulatory changes could be in place in time for the 2027 Winter One fishery. So final action is tentatively scheduled for August of this year. In the fall, staff will work to develop the rulemaking package and submit that to NOAA Fisheries with the hope that implemented changes would become effective by January 1st, 2027. However, like I mentioned before, some alternatives dealing with additional catch reporting requirements would likely require delayed implementation. So with that, I'd be happy to take any questions or we can dive into the discussion. And I've just provided a summary here of all of the proposed alternatives as well as recommendations from the FMAT. That's all I have, Mr. Chair.
Hayden, I'm sorry. I remember when Scup was the easy species. I'm not sure what they did to you here. Thank you. That was fantastic. And thank you for the presentation, and thanks to the FMAT. This is a lot more complicated than I was initially thinking, and more so than probably a lot of our frameworks have been. With that, this is probably the first time this week, because it is so complicated, I don't want to just open it to questions and discussion. I would just like to stick with questions on the presentation. And as I mentioned earlier, when I speak about staying around the table, I'm going to be taking hands from both the council members and commission members. And some of us are both, right, Chris? Okay, so questions on the presentation for Hayden. Michelle, you're up first, and then Chris.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I think this isn't a question for Hayden really, but more a question for the regional administrator. And I think, Mike, just in looking at alternative 2C, which kind of was a recommendation from industry about the potential for having vessels, report their landings via VMS a little bit earlier. I'd be curious to hear from you or your staff, the what it might look like having to go through any extra OMB clearance for Paperwork Reduction Act requirements, and because it does seem like that could be helpful, but could that be done in time for this to be useful for future Winter One fisheries?
Yeah, thanks. Good question. I think if the council is taking final action, in August on this framework in August or so, getting this in place through OMB clearance, PRA clearance for January 1, probably unlikely. But for, we can do it and we'd have it in place for future years. So there might be 1 year where we don't have PRA approval for the VMS reporting, but that would be just sort of one interim year, and then we'd have it for the future because I don't see this as a big lift. We're adding one additional call in and trip declaration and one additional hail weight reporting requirement for the industry.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, if I might just have a quick
Yes,
follow-up.
go ahead.
And so, because you wouldn't have that trip declaration in place, even if vessels wanted to voluntarily provide this information to your staff, it would be difficult to put it in the right bucket, right?
Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, because we would, if we're following the normal process would be council would submit the framework adjustment. We'd go through rulemaking. While we're going through rulemaking, we're submitting the paperwork to OMB for a PRA approval, but we're also working on the back end to update the declaration codes in the VMS systems that basically give the vessels a mechanism to declare and report. And that's that can be a time-consuming process too, because it's not just something that we have complete control over. We have to work with the VMS program and the VMS vendors that then have to update their software. And so, you know, giving everybody some reasonable space to operate, you know, between the council final action in January 1, more likely that we could expect that to be in place by the following year.
Okay, Chris Savage and then Jim Gilmore.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for the presentation, Hayden. For alternatives 3B and 3C, if one of those was chosen, you mentioned kind of the lag in final landings data for you know the entire year. In those cases, would the payback then occur in a subsequent year? Like, so for instance, if we went over in 2026, then would the payback happen in 2028? And if that's the case, is there any issues just kind of with how we monitor this and manage this fishery by having the payback, you know, 2 years later as opposed to the following year?
So aside from identifying the timing issue there, the FMAT has not exactly figured out how a required payback would work. I think that what you just suggested is an option, but I would turn to Garfo to provide more clarity on that.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks, Hayden. And you know, we've been talking internally about how different ways that we could track this and when we would implement a payback if there was one required. And so one approach, recognizing that there's a lot more development needs to happen, but sort of one approach for people to be thinking about is, and this is based in part on sort of our experience with Winter 2, about when the landings occur and the trajectory and sort of pace of landing, would be, you know, by the fall, we know what we know what happened in Winter 1. We've made any, you know, if there was an overage in Winter 1, which is really what we're focused on, then there's no transfer of extra quota into Winter 2. So the possession limits in Winter 2 are lower. They're the standard possession limits. And then we've gone through summer period, and by, you know, October, November, we know kind of what was landed. We have a really good sense of what was landed in the summer period. So we can already do the math to see if an underage in the summer period offset the overage in Winter 1. If it didn't fully offset, then there's some amount of overage remaining from Winter 1. We can look at what's happening in Winter 2. And the idea is that it's probably by sometime early December, we'll be able to do a projection and determine whether it's likely that the Winter 2 landings would completely or partially offset any remaining overage from Winter 1. If we project that there is still going to be, at the end of the year, some amount of Winter 1 overage that hasn't been compensated for, then we could, when we set the final quota for the coming year, we could make that adjustment. And now if we overshoot it, in other words, if we deduct 100,000 pounds and it turns out it was only 75,000 pounds, once we settle out at the end of the year, then we could do a relatively simple in-season action to put those fish back. And if we undershot it, it was, you know, a few thousand pounds extra, then we can kind of roll that forward into the next rules, you know, next spec setting process. But the idea is that we would have enough of a pretty good picture by December whether an overage adjustment is needed for the following year. I think that might be a more timely approach than just waiting an entire year to settle up, because it gets at that Winter 1 fishery in a more timely manner. But I don't think we're going to be talking about big numbers, because as has been evidence, you know, summer period and Winter 2 in particular have traditionally under harvested their quota, which provides that opportunity to offset any overage from Winter 1. The other thing is we're talking about, you know, we're reacting to a 1.8 million pound overage, which was unprecedented. And I think one of the first things that we're talking about in the modified Winter 1 trip limit requirements under the, you know, alternatives 1B and 1C is a way to mitigate that, so we don't get to the point of having a 1.8 million pound overage coming out of winter one. And so, these smaller things that we can do through this action will help us not be in this situation in the future.
Great question, Chris. Thank you, Mike. That was very helpful. Jim, and then I got David Borden and Eric Reed.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman, and that was really good, Mike. The essentially try and emphasize 1B and 1C. And a comment I'll make later is just keeping this a simple solution seems to be the way to be going. And your description right there kind of gave me great confidence that's the right way to go, because we give you guys more latitude. Hayden, great presentation. And you answered all my questions except for just one. If we started getting into alternative set 2 and started changing reporting timelines or whatever, what's the penalty if you go past either the harvesters or the dealers miss a reporting deadline?
Garfo might be able to answer that question. I'm not sure there are any penalties per se.
Typically, I think I'll look for some assistance from the team, but typically it's, the first step is a phone call to the dealer. Hey, it looks like you're missing a report. Can you try to get that to us? It might be a follow-up call or an email. Eventually it might be letting Office of Law Enforcement know. Typically the first step they take is a phone call or an email saying, hey, you're late on a report. If it gets to be truly egregious, then OLE would take that up with the attorneys, and I don't know what their penalty schedule is for that sort of thing, but typically we resolve almost all of these with simple phone calls and just touching base with people and finding out what's going on, and in some cases we can hold issuance of a permit if they haven't complied with all of their reporting requirements.
Follow up, Jim.
So it sounds like generally it's a rare thing and it gets resolved pretty quickly is the general rule that happens with it, because
well, I mean, I wouldn't say that late reporting is a rare thing. If you look at what was going on in February, March of this year, there was quite a bit of late reporting for a number of reasons. But I think it's the enforcement of that is typically just more outreach and engagement rather than any severe penalties.
All right, we'll keep moving on. David Borden.
Yep, thank you, Mr. Chairman. My question actually follows on the late reporting. On page 9, the second paragraph from the bottom, it references 23% of the EVTRs were submitted late. And is that so that I'm clear, is that EVTRs in general, or is that Scup related, the 23%? Because it could be two different numbers. So which is that? What's the reference to?
So that table is referring to EVTRs for Scup landings reported during the winter one period.
So it's only Scup then?
I believe so, yes.
Okay, thank you very much.
Eric, you're up.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for the presentation. So on page 4 of the briefing materials, it plainly states, and Hayden's gone through it already, that this framework only considers modifications to the postseason landings-based AMs for the commercial Scup fishery. It doesn't mention anything about changing trip limits or anything like that. So when it comes to alternative set 1, in general, trip limits, etc., can be dealt with during the spec setting, and they really don't belong in this framework. However, alternatives 1B and 1C provide needed discretionary flexibility based on projections, not landings, which is much more appropriate for the framework. So I guess my question is, could we move the language in 1B and 1C to set 3 and then eliminate set 1? Is that possible?
I think that the FMET was intentional with how they structured the draft alternatives in this way, just because, I mean, I view the landings-based accountability measures as very separate from the winter one trip limit reduction, which is implemented in season. And so we just felt like the focus of what those two alternative sets are hoping to achieve are slightly different. Alternative set one deals with how the winter one trip limit reduction is implemented, and the third alternative set deals with how repayments of quota period overages would be handled. So I think that they're structured this way just because they aim to achieve different things.
Oh, okay. Thank you for that answer. I appreciate that. But I mean, to me, you know, first of all, I commend the council and how fast this framework is moving and the goal of the framework. And no offense to the FMAT, but it would seem to me that using the 1B and 1C in combination with other options in option 3 would be very appropriate for getting the goal of addressing the AMs before January 1st. And, you know, if I could, but of course I cannot, I would certainly move to reposition from alternative set 1, options 1D and C, to alternative set 3 and eliminate 1. But I can't do it, but that's what I would do. Okay, and I thank you for clarifying in section 3, which is the timing challenge. I think we need to talk about the difference between the AM and the data and the timeline for all of that, but I appreciate it, at least attempting for me anyway, the clarification of that, the last paragraph on page 13. So as far as reporting goes, that would be essentially step 2. I mean, the reporting issue needs more investigation, consideration, and clarification. You know, late reporting is not a new issue, and it's not unique to Scup. And, you know, in this document, it mentions many times the dealers and vessels are to blame here for the issues. So my first question is, and we have a study fleet, and I don't know how many of the study fleet boats are in the Scup fishery, but basically, when they hit the dock, their data is uploaded. So you have that data in real time, you know, and if you were looking for a trend in landings, that would be something to look at, and it's available the day the boat lands as soon as it gets in range of the receiver. So my question is, does anybody look at that study fleet data?
John, go ahead.
Yeah, I think, Mr. Reed, a lot of people look at that study fleet data, but I'm not sure anyone is looking at it in terms of the issue on the table here. It's an interesting idea, and I can reach back to the center and see if we can see, is there some utility in that data to this problem, if that would be helpful.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Hare. So, you know, when it comes to reporting, if you look at table 6, the average of late vessel reports from 2021 to 2025 was 280 reports, with 45% of those less than 7 days late. And the average number of trips in that time frame was 1,274 per year. You know, now if we come to 2026, which is, it's basically preliminary data, it shows 684 trips plus whatever month 4 is, but since the directed fishery was closed, there's probably none. So, you know, generally speaking, 2026 was most likely way less trips and way less reports than in the past. So there's less data to analyze. And if you look at figure 2, which shows the dealer reported landings in weight, not in numbers, so we don't know how many reports were late, we just know how much weight was late. It has no late reporting parameters like less than 7 days, set greater than 7, greater than 14, greater than 13. And if I remember correctly, in our last MF council discussion, it was noted that a software glitch at Garfo prevented acceptance of on-time reporting and data analysis. So it would seem to me that increasing the speed and essentially decreasing the reporting window is not really going to solve a problem if the data can't be analyzed in a timely manner now. So we really need to understand exactly where the problems are in order to find a solution for the reporting. And, I know we need to have some options in this document, but, talking about the reporting in a very, very tight time frame to address 1.8 million pounds of overage and payback by the entire industry really troubles me. That's what we should focus on. And, like I said, I really appreciate the fact that the council is spending a lot of time addressing a one-time anomaly created in 2026 and the speed at which this framework is moving. But the main focus should be on addressing a potentially catastrophic industry-wide $1.8 million pounds. Unfortunately, it's not $1 million. 1.8 million pound payback in January 2027, and trying to hone in on all these other long-standing murky issues really can wait for another day. So I hope the council makes some decisions here today to speed this up and streamline this document. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I thank you.
Okay, thank you, Eric. I'm going to go to Mike Pentney. I think he had a follow-up comment for you.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, just, reminding everybody the conversation we had when we initiated this last meeting. We were kind of doing a deep dive into what led to the situation with the overage and when we were able to close the fishery, and try to avoid pointing fingers or blaming people for the circumstances. It was a kind of perfect storm of a number of issues in terms of the volume of scup that were coming into the docks, a couple of snowstorms that really backed things up, a transition at ACCSP for the upload process for landings, and which were largely the large volume dealers are the ones that use that system, and all of those things sort of came together at the same time that led to the circumstances where we didn't have the data in hand to make the call to reduce the possession limit, which was compounded by the fact that the regulations of require us to wait until we have those data in hand to make that adjustment. So I think, I also, applaud the council and the staff, the FMAT for the speed at which they've put this together. And I think there are some really good measures here. The alternative set one, kind of focuses on what the agency has the authority to do in season in terms of making projections and closing or not closing, depending on whether we think the fishery will hit the winter one quota. Alternative set two, I think, focuses on kind of what data, then if we have the ability to project, I guess, well, what data will we have to use to make those projections? And I think, looking at models for squid and mackerel, other high volume fisheries where we can hit those quotas very quickly within a matter of a few weeks, having a trip declaration by the boats that are landing the majority of the catch. And, one thing I looked at the data, I think it's 88% of the landings came off of trips landing more than 15,000 pounds per trip. So, looking at something like that and saying, if we get a trip declaration through VMS and a hail weight as the vessels are coming in, then that allows us to be much more focused on what the projection should be to trip that limit and make the possession limit reduction without going over. And the VMS declaration allows us to do two things. One, we're getting that snapshot, the hail weight as the vessels are coming in, but we also can see what vessels are currently out. So if we get the hail weights and it looks like, okay, based on what we've got data in hand, we think we're at 95% of the threshold, but there's 10 boats out that have all declared in. Well, if those 10 boats all land, they're 20, 30,000 pounds, we're going to be at the limit. So let's take action now to avoid that overage. So those two pieces of information have proven to be very helpful in some of the other high volume fisheries. And then I agree, I think we need to take action, hopefully the final action in August, so that we can get something in place before January 1 to avoid the substantial overage that we would otherwise have to apply. So I think, the combination of the measures that the council has in front of it, there's things in here that I think would work really well and encourage the continued development of this and hopefully final action in August. Thanks.
Mr. Chair, can I come back to that?
I saw your
for a
hand
minute?
come back. Yeah, go ahead.
Hi, Mr. Penny. I appreciate it, but I'm trying to streamline this. And, a minute ago when we were talking about, what happens to people who report late, and there was a comment made about, well, somebody's going to make a phone call to find out what's going on. To me, basically, you've got a new market. It's a high volume market. We all know that exists. And there's really two players in that market. And, what happened was people were reporting on Tuesday and they were getting confirmation that the data went through. And then Wednesday morning, they got the email saying, no, your data wasn't accepted. What I'm trying to understand is, since it is a high volume fishery and fishing was good, if a dealer report didn't show up on Wednesday or the system kicked it out from Tuesday, how come somebody didn't make 2 phone calls? So that's my comment. So we can talk about it in person, Mike, if you want.
All right, thank you, Eric. We'll try and get through the hands for questions. Luckily, they haven't been continuing, so I'm going to go to Tony Kearns next.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mike, I wanted to follow back up on when we would look at the overages. You said likely December. Is it when the proposed rule would come out in December, or would it be mid-winter 1 that you would be able to notice a overage, and not necessarily just an overage of one of the periods, but if for some reason we had a larger overage where all the periods got the full quota got impacted? And I ask this because the commission notifies the states of their summer period quotas in November, December timeframe. And I want to make sure that we would not be asking them to then go back and reduce their summer period quotas if NOAA came back and said, actually, we have a full reduction. And so if it is in the middle of winter 1, I hope that the framework could take under consideration a delay into the next year for the full quota overage, so that the states don't have to go back and change their quotas.
Yeah, thanks, Tony. And yeah, so this is one of the issues I think we should try to nail down between now and final action, right? The actual process. But what I was suggesting is we would not be doing something in the middle of winter 1 to change the winter 1 quota to account for an overage. I don't want to be in the position of reducing quotas in the middle of the season. Adding some fish back in, at the end of January, is something that we would do if there was, if we overshot an overage projection. But what I was getting at is, there's 2 circumstances, the way we do specs now with multi-year specs. We might be doing a proposed rule if it's a specs year, and that would be presumably in a normal process would be sometime in November. That we might note in the proposed rule that there was an overage in winter 1, whether there is likely an overage in the summer period, that would, potentially cause there to be a payback for the following year. But it would be in the final rule where we make those adjustments, just like we do for the states in summer flounder and bluefish. If there was an adjustment between the proposed rule and the final rule, we would make that call in the final rule and make the adjustment before January 1 as to what the winter 1 quota ultimately will be. In years where we're not doing proposed and final and we're more reaffirming prior year specs, projected specs, we would do the same thing that we do. We do the same thing for a summer flounder, where if there is an overage that's carried forward, we make that announcement and adjustment in that final notice that implements the coming year specs. So we would do the same thing for Scup by announcing any overages that are carried forward into the following year.
Thanks, Mike. I have one more hand for questions, and that's Bobby Rule.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Hannah and staff. That's a very good presentation, very informative. But a couple of things I wanted to ask about. One would be the on the VMS reporting requirement. It's stated here that it would be a daily report. Why would you use that in first versus just a pre notification with total weight?
I actually had the same question. So
Hayden, do you know FMAT's thinking there?
I actually do not have an answer for you on that. I don't know if there are other FMAT members that want to tackle that.
All right, seeing no answer, I'll just. It just seems that it would be cleaner just to do a pre-landing, to where we're not asking somebody else to do the math. You know, because a Scup trip could be a 1-day trip, it could be a 5-day trip, and then you'd have to accrue your weights. The other thing I wanted to point out is with the I mean, looking at what we have for you know, alternatives 1, 2, and 3. If you remove 1B and 1C, and everything else went through, it would not stop what happened this winter, because you don't have. I mean, even if we have super precise VMS, you know, reports, they're still estimated weights until they're actually correlated with an actual landing. It gives you an idea what's coming in, but you all right there, Eric? So I just lost my train of thought there. So I mean, I agree with a lot of the options that are, you know, before us, but you know, I just wanted to point out that unless you have the ability to use projections, and I personally agree with the discretionary authority, what happened this winter would not, you know, you could possibly have a repeat if you don't have, you know, if that language isn't changed.
Yeah, I think we both agree. I think we both agree with that, and I think we agree that maybe Eric's mic is still alive. So Hayden, I think that. Oh, I see one other hand. John Maniscalco. John, did you have a question?
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I think it's more of a comment. No, actually, I do have a question. We've heard a lot about both from Mike and about how the VMS potentially provides a really good tool for quota monitoring. We also heard from Hayden that I think she said 100% of vessels landing over 10,000 pounds are already VMS equipped, so we're not necessarily adding an additional burden on participating fishermen. So I just wanted to ask a question regarding the IVR catch reporting. I haven't heard a lot about it. Is there a benefit that IVR catch reporting would provide the service in monitoring quota that VMS does not? Thank you.
Well, I'll turn that to Mike. Go ahead.
I think the short answer is probably not. I think, you know, talking with my staff, because it's the same system, Fish Online, that you go through now to report via what we call IVR, even though it's no longer interactive nor voice response. It's effectively the same system, and because you need internet access to do that for a vessel that doesn't have, you know, internet access on the vessel, they're not going to be reporting through the IVR system until they've hit the dock, and so in that case, we might as well just rely on the EVTR, which is the same, you know, it uses the same system. So I don't think there's as much value to the IVR system these days as there used to be when it was initially set up.
Okay, so that covers questions for board and council. I am going to turn to the public for questions. And for those of you that really like to hold to tight schedules and are nervous that we're running late, I do just want to mention that we did have one other update on surveys from the Science Center. We are more than likely going to be bumping that until the next meeting to give us more time for this discussion. Okay, so with that, I'm going to go, I'll stay in the room first and then I'll go online. So hands in the room. I see Greg, go ahead.
Go up and
Greg DiDomenico, Lunds Fisheries. Mr. Chairman, would it be okay if I directed a question to staff? Is that all right? Hayden, great job. I had just one question that maybe you can elaborate on. You mentioned that industry members were saying that small boats were unfairly disadvantaged in this situation. What were they disadvantaged by? Were they disadvantaged by going directly from a open fishery to zero possession because of the overage? Or is there something else that I'm missing?
Yeah, from what I recall from those comments, I think the emphasis was placed on the fact that the quota was reached so early and the fishery went straight to a closure. So they missed out on any additional opportunities to harvest throughout the rest of the period. So,
and is there any, you have any idea if these were vessels that already participated in that fishery? Or were they participating in the fishery before the closure during the season? Or they just said that we were disadvantaged?
yeah, I don't have any details on
Okay.
if they were participating. They just shared that they felt that they were disproportionately impacted by the closure.
Okay. I'm not sure that makes a lot of sense, but maybe that's something we can work on. I mean, not what you said, but their comments. I don't know how they were disadvantaged. They were in the fishery, participating in it, and then the closure happened, the overage happened. So what's the disadvantage?
I think that some Winter One participants felt, in their opinion, that larger operators captured most of the quota this year. And so for that reason, they felt disadvantaged because they had less access to it and because the fishery closed early. So that's my understanding of the issue based on what they shared.
Okay, that would be worth drilling down to because I'm not sure how that could be the case, but okay, thank you.
Any other hands in the room? Any other hands online for questions? Okay, not seeing any. Okay. So in order to move this forward, through those questions, I think we've had some important elements of the discussion and some hints at comfort levels on alternatives. And as Hayden mentioned, obviously, you know, the importance here and the votes will be, motions, sorry, will be to the council. So looking to see the comfort level on moving the alternatives forward, the range of alternatives as is, or if there's any preferred alternatives that folks are interested in. Michelle?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So just reflecting on the fact that perhaps Mr. Penning can provide some more clarification, but if the IVR system is really being discontinued, it doesn't seem to make sense to perhaps keep that alternative in the document, which I think is 2D, and I believe
Correct.
Hayden, the FMAT, recommended that perhaps that one be removed, but I guess I would just look to the agency for a little bit of clarification.
Yeah, I was actually preparing to make a motion to adopt what the FMAT is recommending, which would be to move alternative 2D to consider but rejected. for the purposes of this framework.
I would second that motion if you make it.
All right, I will make the motion.
Okay, Mike, do you mind reading that in and then we'll get some names attached to that.
Move that alternative 2D Scup catch reporting via IVR in the June 2026 materials be considered but rejected.
Motion by Mike Pentany and second by Michelle Duval. I don't think we need any further justifications. Any discussion, Lori Nolan?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mike, when you say that it may not be supported going forward, does that mean the current EVTR system that the commercial vessels use is going to be facing a change also because the systems are supported? Okay, what did I miss?
No, so I don't really want to, I don't think it's premature to get into whether other uses of IVR will change or be phased out. What I was trying to get at was if we're focused on Scup and increasing reporting frequency for Scup, the IVR system currently does not provide any benefit that the EVTR system provides. There's no additional benefit to reporting through IVR versus reporting through your EVTR because they use the same platform, which is Fish Online, and they both require internet access. And so for the purposes of this framework, we see no difference in terms of a benefit for IVR. So just get it out of the framework because it doesn't really serve the intended purpose. But I don't want to get into whether other fisheries that currently use IVR, those systems may be retained. We might see modifications, but and then to your direct question, the Fish Online system that supports EVTR, and again, that's just one tool that fishermen can use to accomplish their EVTR requirements. There's still the ACCP apps and Blue, other apps that people can use. Those are all remaining the same, with some normal improvements here and there.
Follow up, Lori?
I just want to say, and maybe I'm totally wrong, and I'll count on Mr. Rule to correct me. What big boats don't have Starlink these days? I mean, don't we all have Starlink, which is internet access? I mean, the crews are out there, the boats are out there. They're FaceTiming their families at home. They're buying their stuff on Amazon. They're downstreaming movies. It's changed their lives. And I don't know a big boat that's offshore that does not have Starlink or internet access in some form. That's my reason for thinking, why can't we leave it? They'll do it. They can do it because they have internet offshore now. You don't have to be on the dock to submit. And that's the only reason I'm talking about it.
Yeah, and I appreciate that. I think, I don't dispute that at all in terms of Starlink. In fact, when I give my report on Thursday, I'm going to mention, that we've done a survey to try to capture that more, in a quantitative way. But I would say the same vessels that have Starlink and have internet have VMS. And that was sort of the point, that 100% of the vessels that landed more than 10,000, 15,000 pounds have VMS. And so if we add a VMS hail, then we've achieved the additional reporting that is contemplated here. IVR just is in our view, an unnecessary extra duplication of a reporting requirement.
Bobby, do you have something to add?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. No, I mean, I see Lori's point, but I think I don't like the idea of using and the Fish Online or EVTR for this because to my knowledge, there's no way to sub-trip it, and you have reporting requirements as far as your timeline when technically you're not supposed to submit that to your back to port. So
Um, to me, utilization of the VMS, you know, just like we did in other fisheries with the pre-landing notification, now the window may need to change. We had issues with that with herring when we first started, that it was a 24-hour pre-landing notification and we were fishing in, you know, 2 hours from the dock. You know, all of that you can kind of figure out, but it's not a definitive answer. It's a way to kind of understand what the removal rate is and what could be coming in, and you definitely need to correlate that with the actual landing. But everybody has VMS pretty much. It's a lot cleaner and a lot easier. I've been using Fish Online for a while. It's not terribly difficult, but it's not as simple as filling out a Marco on the VMS. And as far as the IVR aspect of it, maybe it's just because I'm older than I look. To me, the IVR was the phone call, and honestly, didn't even realize it was still on the books. I thought, you know, that went away with payphones, so I'm perfectly fine with that being removed.
Okay, important clarifications. Thank you for the discussion. And the notion behind the motion is that this is duplicative. Further discussion on this. Okay. Is there any objection to the motion? Not seeing any. Okay, consider this motion passed by unanimous consent. And as far as the alternatives, are there any thoughts on preferred alternatives or moving this forward as presented? Bobby?
Thanks again. I like the way it's presented here, but I personally think that for alternative set 1, that 1B and C should be combined. I think that's where the I think it has a lot more power that way. And you know, having the discretionary authority separate, I mean, it's only useful if in combined with 1B. And I don't see this going forward without both of them being, you know, both of them being utilized.
Okay. Yeah. All right. So there's nothing if this moves forward as is with all alternatives, there's nothing that would prevent that as a final position. But I get what you're saying, that there shouldn't be a pick and choose option necessarily, because that might not work. So that is a consideration. I did see one other hand. Michelle, did you have something to that?
Well, perhaps a way to indicate to the public is to simply select both 1B and 1C as preferreds at this point and continue moving the document forward. But, you know, I would be interested in what others around the table have to say. Thanks.
Agreed. So to that end, I don't know if anyone would be interested in making that, and I apologize, Hayden. I don't know if we have any draft motion language to help us get started or not. Great.
Yeah, I have some draft language here that maybe we can workshop a little bit before we move forward with approving the whole range, if that's what the council wants to do.
Very good. I think that helps.
So the screen is just taking a minute to update. I am editing it, but it's not being reflected there yet, just so everyone knows.
That's okay.
Stephen, I don't know if there's a
Yeah, I
way
was gonna
to
say, if someone
refresh
else,
that.
so if Hayden can't get in there and someone else can, the alternatives would be, in those first two blanks would be one, sorry, now I don't have it in front of me, 1B and C, I believe. Yep.
Mr. Chairman, would it be okay to ask a quick question?
Yeah, absolutely, Mike.
So thinking about this, if we were to select preferred alternatives, is it the same thing as basically saying the council recognizes that the two options, 1B and 1C, are best used in combination with one another, and that it provides the greatest level of flexibility to the regional administrator? Because if that's the case, I would say maybe just adding language like that in the document would keep us from having to then select other preferred alternatives within the range. I just feel like if the public opens this document and sees that we've selected preferred alternatives in one place and not somewhere else, it could lead to confusion. This council doesn't always select preferred alternatives before taking next steps. Just some things in my mind as we're trying to figure out the smoothest, simplest way to move this document along.
Yeah, like I mean, I could only say that I like that idea. I for those same reasons. I don't necessarily want to go through everything. If there aren't, it may seem a bit odd. I don't know. We've talked about that kind of stuff moving forward before, and I don't know how well that type of language sits. But I think we could certainly put something in the document of the importance of having, ensuring that both of those are moved forward. And so I don't know, since we don't actually have a motion on the table, that is still an option to just say that we move the entire range as presented forward, with language that says we think the greatest efficacy of to address the problem statement is to ensure that both of these are moved forward. I'm seeing some head nods, so if there's no objection to that, then I would look for a motion to just to adopt the range of alternatives as a whole as presented. Mike Pentney, you had a comment?
Yeah, I mean, before we do that, I want to ask Hayden, from the staff perspective in preparing this document for final action at the next meeting, if there was another alternative that we wanted to potentially move to consider but rejected, say alternative 2B, would that help the FMAT and staff, to get this document prepared in an expedient way?
Yeah, I would say that anything that can be done to streamline the scope of this would be helpful.
Okay, then I would follow that maybe with another motion to move alternative 2B as considered but rejected. And that's the alternative that changes the reporting frequency for vessel trip reports and dealer reports, in the sense that, dealing with late reports is one thing. Changing the reporting frequency for one fishery and one type of permit just is a more complicated approach when we're trying to reconcile data. We still are going to do weekly quota updates, and so it's just not clear to me and to our team how moving dealer reports more frequently will necessarily get over the issue. Certainly alternative set 1, which we just discussed, is where most of the benefit is going to be in avoiding a repeat of 2026. But then also alternative set 3 is the focus for avoiding the payback. If we're talking about, the information that we would use to make those projections in a high volume, quickly accruing landing situation, I think VMS, again, I'll come back to it. VMS for boats that already have it, giving us a hail when they're landing significant volumes of Scup, is going to give us the information that we can use to make more precise and accurate projections. Changing reporting requirements for dealers and all vessels, to me, doesn't give us as much information as maybe people think it would give us. So I would propose to get rid of that, just to streamline this document so that we can we can be as expedient as possible in terms of moving this action forward.
Okay, thank you, Mike. And we have a second from Joe Grist. So if we can get those names attached to that, and I'm so thankful that the blue screen is now cooperating, and we have a motion that everyone can see. And as I mentioned, we'll get the names attached. Bonnie, I see your hand, but we have a motion and a second. So I'm assuming, Mike, that you have fully exhausted your explanation for it. Joe, you're okay. You don't need to add anything to that. So that is Pentney and Grist. I shouldn't have complimented the blue screen. It's back to being uncooperative, unfortunately. There we go. Okay. Discussion at the table amongst council members, and then I'll go to the public before Bonnie falls out. No discussion around the table. So I will go to the public. Bonnie, I appreciate you had your hand up for a bit. So if it isn't necessarily to the motion, I just didn't want to leave a motion hanging there.
No, that is to this motion. We don't support, NEFSC doesn't support, Bonnie Brady, New England Fishermen's Stewardship Association, we do not support this draft motion. We support further analysis of alternative B and determine whether dealer reporting delays, EBTR delays, or a combination of both were the primary contributors to the overage. I confess to being somewhat ignorant because I thought EBTRs had to be finished by the time you hit the dock. That's what we've always done in New York. And a weekly reporting for Scup, I don't believe every fishery, the dealers have those weekly requirements. I may be wrong on that, but clearly, especially because of the glitch and that reports were being submitted and then getting kicked back, I would think if it was a daily reporting requirement, that should possibly solve that issue. In addition to, I'm not sure if, is it considered the safest reporting for the larger dealers? Because I know federal dealer reports for safest, there's a 24-hour hotline that you can call, that you used to be able to call at least. I don't know if that still exists, but that's something that really I think needs to be evaluated. Regarding the past thing, thank you on alternatives 1B and C. Further analysis definitely to determine what happened in 2026 and establish clear criteria for any discretionary authority. I could go on with a couple more and then be done, or I'll just come keeping back and forth. You tell me. Thank you.
Keep coming back. Sorry, Bonnie. Thank you. Okay, so I don't know if there are any elements of that question that, Mike, do you feel there's anything on that? Bonnie's concern that you can address, and obviously there were a couple different things coming in there. But.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, I don't dispute that, if we had all the time in the world to work on this framework and get it perfect, yeah, we could do some additional analysis on reporting frequency in the Scup fishery. What effect would we think that increasing reported frequency on dealers might have to avoid the situation? But what I've heard from the industry and what I've heard from around the table is the sense of urgency to get something completed as soon as possible, as expediently as possible, and as simply as possible, to both give us the tools to avoid a significant overage in the future, and also avoid any unnecessary paybacks in the next year. And so it seems like alternative sets 1 and 3 are the 2 areas to focus on to achieve both of those goals. Alternative set 2 would improve the tools that we then have available to make those projections and make those decisions. But within the set of alternatives that were available, it's, what I was trying to express is that it's our perspective that the biggest bang for the buck in terms of giving us the tools to make accurate and timely projections would be through the VMS change. not necessarily to changes to the EVTR and the dealer report. So if it's the council's desire to streamline this action as much as possible for expedient, processing and decision, then I'm just suggesting we could get rid of alternative 2B and still achieve, 99% of what we're trying to achieve with this action.
Okay, thanks, Mike. I appreciate that. And I'm going to stay with the public and I'm going to say that since the council is handling these motions on their own, we still do have some board members with us. I'm going to consider you members of the public at this point. So, obviously this is a topic that not a lot of council members have a lot of information on. So the importance of industry input and any commission members that have input on this would be appreciated, honestly, at this time. So not seeing any other hands. Bonnie, did you have a follow-up then?
Mike, I get the point about VMS. That's not really the question. And Lori, we're probably the only boat that doesn't have Starlink, just so you know. But what about any way to determine if the VMS totals will actually equal out or if there's a dealer issue? If they're not reporting and if there's the hail weight versus what actually is being pumped or whatever, so that it gets to be larger, that 1 week timeline. I understand you want to streamline, but the goal is to never have what happened again and have the entire winter 1 period be able to be caught. Because a half of southern New England, well, actually not more than half of southern New England lost 6 weeks of the scup fishery due to, and I saw you back in March, I was still trying to figure out, okay, the bycatch was in one period versus the other, maybe we could extend it. By the time we talked, it was already a done deal. And, a lot of fishermen, Greg, were unable, they had to spend their entire day avoiding scup and not really catching much else. So part of the question was as to who's entered the fishery and who was not considered historical members, but because of all the other fisheries that weren't catching, everybody jumped in. We really hope you evaluate that. It just needs to be fixed once and fixed right if it's possible. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Thank you, Bonnie. Appreciate that. We don't have any other hands on this. So it is time to call the question on this. So I'll try this. Are there any objections to the motion? Not seeing any objections. So we'll consider this motion passed by consent. So we have 2 removals for us. And now back to the ultimate question of moving this forward. We had a discussion on moving the rest of, and I guess the draft motion we'll probably want to see on this then, Hayden or Stephen, whoever's working on this, is to adopt the range of alternatives as modified today, obviously. And I'll see if we have hands to move that forward. What's the question? Lori, did you have a question?
Well, the motion on the board doesn't reflect what you're asking us. Are we dealing with that motion?
I think there'll be. Right now, is this just an older hidden?
Sorry, could I get some clarification on the motion that the council wants to see right now?
Yeah, well, my suggestion was we have modified what was presented. The idea was to move, I believe, and anyone else can jump in, to move everything else forward. So as presented and as modified today, and then and I don't know that it needs to be in the motion, but since we saw head nods and no objections, the idea that there would be language of the importance of keeping 1B and 1C together for the efficacy of the problem statement. So the motion would just be to adopt the range of alternatives as modified today.
Okay, so with the motion that's on the board, you'd just like to remove the second half of that?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
So we did have a sidebar on just whether or not we could either do this through a motion or just, is there any objection to language that says we believe that keeping 1B and having 1B and 1C combined is the most effective way to address the problem statement. Is there any objection to that language? Okay, I don't see any. No hands. No hands online. Okay. All right. We have wording for a draft motion with no names attached. Mike Louisi, would you like to make that motion? Thank you very much, Mike. I know you feel my pain.
It's all good, Joe. Yes, I will be happy to make the motion. So with that understood, with that discussion understood that that will be language, I would move to adopt the range of alternatives as modified today.
Motion by Mike Louisi. I have a second by Jim Gilmore. Okay. Nothing to add. Great. Any further discussion on the motion? Okay. Around the table. Not seeing any from council members. I see a hand from Emerson Hasbrook from the board. Emerson, do you have a comment?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yeah, so there's quite a few members of the Summer Flounder, Scup, and Black Sea Bass Board here today, mostly virtual. I'm not sure who's in the room. And it seems like we're here maybe just as window dressing today. But from a commission perspective, do we need a similar motion here relative to alternative set 3? It's my understanding that the commission is going to have to initiate an action relative to the FMP, but just based on alternative set 3. So how do we proceed here? Thank you.
Yep. Thank you, Emerson, for the question. Tony Kearns.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Emerson, we're going to wait until the council finishes the action or has more detail on that action so we know exactly what's happening. As we said earlier, there are alternatives here that we don't need to do because our FMP has the ability to do those things already. And then we'll come forward maybe at the August meeting and initiate an action and then move forward from there.
Thank you, Tony. Okay. Not seeing any further discussion on the motion around the table. Is there any other public comment on the motion? Greg DiDomenico.
Greg DiDomenico, Lens Fisheries. Just maybe a little bit of clarification. Mike, within this, will you be able to have the discretion to project landings and initiate the closure at something other than 80%, like we had discussed a long time ago, like 90%?
So this framework is giving me the authority to project and not close the fishery if they're not going to reach the 80% threshold, and those actual possession limits, those are in the specs. So this action isn't intended to redo the specs, but I think the numbers are set for 2027 because we've already done the specs for 2027. So in a future specs action, the council and the board collectively could revise those possession limit and the threshold and the reactive possession limit.
if it was changed to 90 in the future in a specs package, you would be able to take advantage of that. Okay. And then lastly, the other clarification also has to be done. If there was going to be a change in the possession limit, that too would have to be through the specs package. Right? Okay. Thank you very much.
Good question. Thanks, Rick. Any other comments on the motion from the public? Not seeing any. Okay. Any objection to the motion? Any abstentions from the motion? Not seeing any. Okay. Motion passes by unanimous consent. Hayden, I'm afraid to ask. Is there anything else you need from us?
One thing I wanted to clarify before we close out the meeting. So with this motion, there was no objection to making sure that there's language in the framework document that mentions that 1B and 1C are best considered together. I just wanted to note that in the briefing materials, we do have language in there that says that they could be selected, together, even though they're not structured that way. But moving forward, as the FMAT develops these these alternatives more fully, I just want to get clarification that what the council desires is for 1B and 1C to actually be combined so that they are not separate in that document, if that makes sense. Is that what the council is intending?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I know. That's Mike. This is you started this.
Yeah, I didn't really think I was starting much, but I'm comfortable leaving it exactly the way that it is with a note under alternative set 1 that the council has had a discussion, and I think we could probably all agree that the combined use of 1B and 1C likely provides the greatest level of flexibility for the regional administrator, period. That's it. Not that it's what we are going to vote on and say yes to at the final action meeting. But I think we can recognize that that's the greatest level of flexibility. And I think it should be identified in the document so the public understands that the combination of those two, as we select our actions in final action, could lead to that.
Thanks,
we could also leave all that language out and just leave the document completely alone. But, I'm happy with either way.
Yeah, well, if you can, Mike. So I think Hayden, I don't actually. The more I think about it, I don't think that would be appropriate. I think, just an explanation. I think since we did not go even as far as preferred alternatives, I don't think we should be changing anything. I think just a note that the council does believe that as far as the efficacy of that, staying together is very important. Okay, great. Thank you. I'd like to say we were ahead of schedule, but we're sort of on time. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So thank you, everyone. So that concludes this meeting for the Scup Winter 1 framework. As I mentioned, we are going to be bumping the Northeast Fisheries Science Center survey updates. Hopefully we can get them on the August schedule, and I apologize to Peter for doing that so last minute, but hopefully if we can't get you in August, we will work on another time, and we will stay in touch. And thank you, John, for your help in communicating that information. We do have one other agenda item today, and that is at 4:30. So we're not doing too bad. So that we do have a couple outgoing council members that we want to acknowledge. But before we do that, we'll take a quick break. So I'm gonna say 10 minutes just because I know you guys. I would have said 15, but we'll call it 10 and I'll see you in 15, all right? All right, council members.
The person who's going to
Okay. We'll reconvene here. So we do have one last agenda item, and I don't know how many of you have seen the Great British Bake Off, but I get the sad bit right now. We have two departing members at our June council meetings. That is when we say goodbye to those that are either terming out or are wrapping up before we have new council members appointed at our August meeting. So first up, I want to acknowledge Sonny Gwynn. Sonny was appointed to the council in 2017. He served with dedication for 9 years, which is, as you all know, the term limit. During this time, he's brought a practical, real-world perspective to our discussions, grounded in decades of experience on the water. I think all of us have had a chance to speak with Sonny over these years, learn his fishing experiences up and down the Atlantic, and just really appreciate all that he's brought to this role. He's been chair of the Spiny Dogfish Committee for the past 6 years and helped the council navigate some challenging discussions surrounding the dogfish specifications. He's consistently sought to find a reasonable balance between the scientific information before us and the realities facing the fishermen and the fishing industry. Sonny's leadership helped guide the development of revisions to the dogfish accountability measures, and that's hopefully going to provide greater stability and predictability for that fishery. Sonny also served as the council's liaison to the South Atlantic Fishery Management Council for the past 3 years, and thank you for that service as well, Sonny. And he's helped strengthen the communication and coordination between the two regions. We will miss most about Sonny, of course, is his thoughtful contributions to the discussions around the table. And perhaps second most is his contributions to hospitality. I'm not sure that's the proper order. It all depends on how much you guys like seafood, I think. So from oysters, ceviche, crab cakes, smoked marlin, and barbecue wrapped scallops. Thank you so very much for all of that, Sonny. Sonny has done all of that with incredible generosity, good humor, genuine interest in all of us, and he's helped foster a true collaborative spirit that has been very important to us. So, Sonny, on behalf of the council, I'd like to thank you for your 9 years of dedicated service, and we wish you all the best and hope to see you around. Thank you so very much.
Yep. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, everybody. I've been working on the water for 50 years, just like the MSA. I've been here for 50 years, and there's been a lot of changes, Back in the time when I started fishing, I could pretty much get a boat and do what I want, go catch anything I want. And have things changed. But it's been great. I want to thank everybody. I want to thank Chris Moore and your staff. Great people. You got a lot of smart people working for you. Thank you. And thank all you council members. And just to let you know, good luck with your endeavor that you have to in the future. And because I have my son taking over my business, do a good job. Make sure he stays in business. So thank you. Thank you very much.
And we have one other council member who is leaving us after this meeting, Dr. Michelle Duvall. Michelle was appointed to the council in 2020 at the height of the COVID pandemic. She served with distinction for 6 years. During that time, Michelle's taken on several important leadership roles. She's chaired the Research Steering Committee for 3 years. She's been chair of the Ecosystem and Ocean Planning Committee for the past 4 years. As EOP committee chair, Michelle played a key role in advancing several important ecosystem initiatives. And as I mentioned, during that time, I gave up on the EOP because it was such an incredible endeavor. The comprehensive review of the EAFAM risk assessment, development of the policy for reviewing exempted fishing permit applications for ecosystem component species, and most recently, the EFH review process. As chair of the Research Steering Committee, Michelle helped guide committee discussions during a critical period when the council was evaluating the future of the research set-aside program. I'd be remiss not to mention that Michelle brought a wealth of prior experience to her position on this council. She had previously spent more than a decade with the North Carolina Division of Fisheries, where Michelle and I became friends, and served for 6 years on the South Atlantic Fishery Management Council, including 2 as chair, so a fellow commiserate, always appreciated. Michelle contributed to the Mid-Atlantic Council's work as a consultant, actually. I think many of you know that, during the development of the council's 2019 through 2024 strategic plan. Thank you for that as well, Michelle. Through her service, Michelle has been known for her preparation and engagement. You could always count on her to ask a question, and someone's going to have to fill that role. I just want you all to know that. I gave Michelle a hug out in the hallway today because she's also always willing to make a motion when it seems like no one else is about to do that. So, Michelle, I don't know how we're going to replace you for those things, but on behalf of the council, I so want to thank you for all your contributions and all your hard work and dedication. Thank you very much.
Wow, that's heavy. No, thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks to everybody sitting around the table. It's been an honor and a privilege to sit here and serve with you. And I think thanks to all of the fishermen that I've talked to over the years and who've been willing to teach me about their fisheries. As Sunny said, huge thanks to Dr. Moore and all of the council staff for all the support. I think especially over the past year, it's been a little bit of a bumpy one for me. And also, thanks to NOAA Fisheries, to the Garfo staff and Science Center staff. It seems like you guys are always willing to answer any crazy question that I ever had. So, I appreciate that as well. And I'm gonna, it's time for me to take a step back and focus on some other priorities, but I certainly won't disappear. I'm sure I will come back and spy on you all, at a webinar here and there. So y'all behave yourselves, you hear, but thank you very much. It's been a great time. Thanks.
Thank you both. I do hope to see you both around. That is the end of our agenda, but we do have a special announcement. So I believe Jennifer Chatfield is here from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. So Jennifer, if you wouldn't mind coming up. I don't know if you could either or. Yep, perfect. Thank you. No, I'm sure the room can hear you, but there's still a few people online. So,
okay. Oh, now I'm on. So actually, thank you so much for the opportunity to come and address the group here. It's my very first time, right? Long time follower, first time talker. So I actually serve, not with the Fish and Wildlife Service, but it's a common mistake, don't worry. I'm the Deputy Assistant Secretary for Fish and Wildlife and Parks. And so in the Office of the Assistant Secretary, we sit atop both the Fish and Wildlife Service and the National Park Service. I would be remiss if I didn't mention our national parks with everything that President Trump is doing regarding those. But I'm not here today to talk about parks. I came here today to share what I think many of you will find as good news. We are finalizing and should be in the Federal Register tomorrow, a rule amending the definition of shellfish. Many of you, I think, saw our initial rule. And so that will be removing the phrase having a shell from the current rule and really modernize it, bring it up to date with current taxonomic nomenclature, scientific classification, and really look to more appropriately regulate them. So it will include the mollusks, specifically squid, and others, cuttlefish, etc. And so that will be finalized and really is part of our deregulatory efforts with the Trump administration. And so I want to say thank you to all of you for your support as we move through the process to finalize this and hopefully relieve some of that regulatory burden for you and for the rest of America as we look to do in the Trump administration. So thank you so much for your support on that and for the opportunity to speak to you today.
Well, thank you so much. I appreciate that. And I apologize for that misintroduction. I also want to thank Annie Hawkins, who I don't think is here yet, but hopefully we will have a chance to see her for all the hard work and finally moving this forward. It's been something that we've been pushing for a while, and it's very exciting to see happen. So thank you so much. And as a special announcement, just as far as parks go, for my turning 50, I plan to go to Yosemite. So
Okay, wonderful. Everyone should plan such a trip. Yes. And thank you for mentioning Annie. Yes, I wouldn't be here today if it wasn't for Annie browbeating me into coming out of my office to talk with you all. And I'm so very glad that she did. She also was involved when she was still in her old role at NOAA. We reached out and spoke with her and her colleagues there to assure we weren't running afoul of our sister agency. So thank you for that reminder. That was a terrible oversight. Yes. So yeah. So I think I'm standing between you all and like a reception, and so that's all I have. But I hope to talk with each of you this evening. Thank you.
And I'll turn it over to Chris because we do have an announcement about the reception outside. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And speaking of receptions, yeah, Jennifer, yeah, thanks for everything, and certainly you're welcome with Annie to participate in our reception this evening. The reception will start at, we'll open the doors at 5. The reception is occurring right here. So walk out that door, walk through those glass doors, and it's going to be right there in that open area right there. We also have a closed area that, in case it does rain, hopefully it doesn't, but we have another area off to the right where you can go if it gets too hot outside or if it does start to rain. In that particular room, we're going to have a slideshow that we'll be showing folks with some photos that we received as a part of our photo contest, as well as some historic photos that Mary found on our old website. So we'll be looking at those. So couple things. It's a cash bar. So the bar is open at 5, but it is cash bar. So if you don't have cash, you got to go to the ATM, which is right over here, and get some cash. But it's happy hour prices on the drinks, so that's a good thing. So it won't be a lot of cash. The food will be served at 5:30. At 5:45, we're going to have some opening remarks from Joe, followed by our very special guest speaker Sam, who's going to say a few words, and then at 6:30, we're going to have a trivia game led by our very own trivia host, Mary Sabo. So that'll start at 6:30. Hopefully everyone will stick around for that. And if you have any questions, find me. But yeah, we'll see you all at the reception. If there's anyone in the room that wants to go to the reception and didn't let us know, you can go to the reception. All you have to do is give Shelley $30 and you can get into the reception. So with that, thank you, and we'll see you all there.